Chapter 292. These pancakes were different from those that Xiao Xian and the others usually ate. They were sturdier, so sturdier that they could be used as discus to kill people. Xiao Xian broke off a piece from a pancake and felt the strength. Without the strength of a totem warrior, it would be very difficult to break off a piece from a thick pancake. Xiao Xian put a small piece into his mouth and chewed it. He felt that this kind of pancake should be labeled, "Do not eat those with bad teeth." "It's hard, but it's filling," Xiao Xian commented. "It's a must-have for us travelers in the remote areas. Different from trading with others, these pancakes are made by our tribe for our own people. Generally we won't trade them. There is little food in the wasteland. With these you can at least survive temporarily." Yang Sui handed a black stone wrapped in tree bark to Xiao Xian. "You can use this too." "What is this?" Xiao Xian felt the coolness on the black stone and guessed, "Rain stone?" This is indeed a rain stone, but it's not an ordinary one. You can only find a small one like this in 1,000 rain stones. We call it the spiritual rain stone. It's a gift from the gods. It can help people in the tribe survive the driest season. Xiao Xian touched the surface of this small black stone. Just for a while the part that touched the leaves had a layer of moist mist. But the part that didn't touch the leaves evaporated even if it formed a layer of mist. It was indeed a magical tool for water production in arid areas. "Thank you." Xiao Xian didn't refuse Yang Sui's kindness. He wrapped the small stone with leaves again and put it in a clean animal skin bag. "Don't thank me. If it weren't for you I would have been burned to death." Yang Sui paused and said, "If you meet a slave owner in the wasteland, don't fight with them. Try to avoid them." "How much do you know about slave owners?" Xiao Xian asked. "The people of the Rain tribe who lived here should know more about slaves and slave owners." "Slave owners?" Yang Sui's eyes flashed with a hint of fear. "Slave owners are a group of people without any fire. In the eyes of the tribesmen without a fire seed, it meant that they could not form a tribe. Without a tribe they were naturally wanderers with weak combat power. However, the slave owners were different. They didn't have a fire seed but they had great power. They could even create more powerful slaves." "Where does their power come from?" Xiao Xian was puzzled. "I don't know." Yang Sui shook his head. "Maybe that's the reason why people from the central region go there again and again. In the records of the ancestors of the Rain tribe, it was mentioned that the slave owners had the ability to make the people in the central region fear them. 1,000 years ago they appeared and stirred up a storm. Many tribes were wiped out because of this. After that they all entered the land of death. Because of this many people were extremely puzzled. There were also people who entered the land of death in order to find the answer. However, it was always the case that more people went in than came out. Some became slaves and some died. Only you people from the central region often go there. If you see something shocking, come back and tell me." Yang Sui said with a smile. "Okay." After talking with Xiao Xian for a while, Yang Sui and Mi Su left. Some people of the Rain tribe were looking for Yang Sui. The shaman had many things to deal with, but Yang Sui asked them to wait first. So they gathered not far away and waited obediently. Looking at the respectful appearance of those people waiting in the Rain tribe in front of Yang Sui, at least in recent years Yang Sui's status was stable. Xiao Xian carried the disc-like flatbread and the rain stone. He looked at the camel with a face like a mythical beast. Misu said it was called mud. In the Rain tribe, mud was not a bad word, just like mud, which was a lucky word. What was mud? Soil and water. For the Rain tribe, which lacked water, it would be good if the soil was like mud instead of dry and cracked hard blocks. "Let's go, mud." Xiao Xian led the camel to the wooden house where they rested and tied it at the door of the house. Lei and Tua thought that Xiao Xian brought the camel as a spare food in the future, so they looked at the camel with shining eyes. "Hey, with that kind of thing we will be slowed down. It's better to eat it now," a man of the Tianshan tribe said. What he got in response was a long puff from the camel's trembling lips. Huang Yi and others were no strangers to camels. They did not express any other opinions about Xiao Xian taking the camel. They only asked Xiao Xian to pay attention and not fall behind. The next day the traveling team left the Rain tribe and headed for the desert. As Xiao Xian expected, the further they went, the more serious the desertification was. At first there were some trees and grass, but slowly there was only sand left. The sun was high in the sky and the sand on the ground was hot. The group hurried on. Huang Yi said that before tonight they had to get to a place to rest where it would be safer. Until now no one had fallen behind. Those who could follow were selected, and those who could not meet the requirements would not drag the team down. Even if some of these people could not keep up, the elders would let them go back by themselves. The team would not delay the progress because of a small number of people. Xiao Xian looked at the camel called Mud that had been following him. On its body, it carried several animal skin bags with food and stone tools, as well as several pieces of animal skin. However, it still followed the team closely and did not fall behind. Xiao Xian and the other two were much more relaxed. Although they could carry it themselves and the weight was nothing, it could reduce some of the load and they could better maintain their physical strength. Coming to such a dry land for the first time, Lei and Tua were somewhat unaccustomed to it, so it was easier to reduce the load. Other people who came here for the first time were also unaccustomed to it, but they did not have a camel to help them carry it. At first they were cynical, but now after running for a while, they glanced over there with envy and jealousy. In order to resist the strong Yang Guang, the camel's brow bone was very high. In order to resist the wind and sand, the camel's eyelashes were also long. When this fellow raised its neck and looked down at people, tut, that noble and indifferent look was funny. In the sky, the 5 eagles had been following. Sometimes they saw some movement in the desert and rushed to fight for food. When it was close to dark, the team finally arrived at the resting place that Huang Yi said. It looked like an abandoned village. The walls were surrounded by sand and stone, and there were dried wooden stakes. Broken pottery shards and stone tools that were half buried could be seen everywhere. Xiao Xian and the others were not the only people who arrived there. Before them there was a team that looked like slaves, but it was very different from the slave team they met when they came. These people were not bound. It's the sand slaves. Someone next to him said. Sand slaves were the tribal people's name for slaves born in the desert. These people, their ancestors were already slaves, and they did not know which generation of slaves they were. These people were different from the new slaves. They did not need to be bound and would not run away. Xiao Xian looked at them. These people were not much different from the tribal people in terms of appearance, but they were thin and had dark skin, which was one of the physical characteristics common to most desert residents. Perhaps it was because of the strong sunlight, excessive exposure to the sun, and the harsh desert climate with frequent sandstorms, as well as the fact that they often sat by the fire to warm themselves, their skin lost its elasticity and became wrinkled, stiff, rough, and cracked. Their teeth were yellow, their feet were bare, they did not wear any protective footwear, and their feet were larger than the average person. When they looked at Xiao Xian and others, their eyes were curious and guarded, and when they saw what the people in the team were carrying, the look in these people's eyes was greedy and murderous. Chapter 293. There was no need for others to say more. Looking at the eyes of these sand slaves, the others knew what to do. This was indeed a good place to rest, but when resting they could not take it lightly. The first thing to guard against was these sand slaves. There were only some walls of different heights and there was no roof. The blowing wind was dry and dusty. As the sky gradually darkened, the surrounding temperature also plummeted. Even the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe who had adapted to the cold winter, felt goosebumps all over their bodies. They were not cold, but they always felt a sense of chill. Let's eat something first and then we will take turns to watch the night, Xiao Xian said. A piece of cake was broken, and the 3 people shared it with a little dried meat and water. The other people in the team also ate in a similar way. The people of each tribe gathered together. At this time, the people of their own tribe were naturally much more reliable. Xiao Xian looked at the camel that followed him. This guy was very smart. He knew to follow Xiao Xian and avoid other people, especially the sand slaves. At this time, it was chewing a plant that looked like a dead tree root growing in the corner, eating with relish. The eyes of those sand slaves swept around the people in the team, and then stopped at Mud, who was chewing with greed in their eyes. The sand slave closest to Mud finally could not help it. Sand slave, who had dark skin, seemed to be covered with a layer of protection in the night. He held a sharpened bone spur and rushed out like a predator in the night. Although his ultimate goal was the camel, the first thing he had to deal with was Xiao Xian next to the camel. There were no other unnecessary movements, everything was only the pursuit of speed. Accurate, ruthless, enough to kill with one blow. If Xiao Xian were to be pierced by the bone spur, his chest would be pierced through. No matter how strong a totem warrior was, he would not be able to escape the fate of being pierced to death. There was no fire on Xiao Xian's side. Under the moonlight, Xiao Xian saw the serrated patterns on the sand slave's body, which was different from the slaves he had seen before. When he saw Xiao Xian, the slaves over there had chain-like patterns, not serrated. So, these slaves belonged to different slave owners? Sand slave's eyes reflected the cold moonlight, with a hint of bloodthirsty excitement, as if he wanted to immediately hook a piece of meat from the other side. Perhaps he thought that he would be able to get rid of these extra people very quickly and then monopolize the camel. The sound of his body being penetrated was particularly clear at this moment. The expression on Sha Nu's face froze. Not only did he fail to stab his target, but he also suffered a sudden sharp pain. The stone saber had a powerful penetrating force, like a fierce beast, and fiercely pierced into Sha Nu's body, and then easily sent him flying. Bang! Sha Nu, who was sent flying, fell to the ground and lost his breath. Xiao Xian waved the stone saber in his hand, shook off the blood on his body, inserted it into the sand in front of him, and then looked up at the group of sand slaves over there. Several sand slaves saw the people who did not get up after falling to the ground. There were no expressions of surprise or fear on their faces, just curiosity and sizing them up. It seemed that they were re-evaluating Xiao Xian's fighting power and the threat of this team. Among the group of sand slaves, there were several strong people. They were not as thin as other sand slaves. No other sand slaves approached within 2 steps of them. They glanced at Huang Yi and others and then continued to do their own things. They skewered an unknown creature on the bone saber and roasted it on the fire. Because there was limited firewood in this place, the fire that could be ignited was not big, and the fire was also limited. Some of the meat was not roasted, but they still ate it. When they bit, they also brought out some animal viscera and blood. That should be a higher level slave, right? Tua asked Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian nodded. You sleep first, Lei, and I will keep watch. Because of such a disadvantageous situation, Xiao Xian decided that 2 people would keep watch at night, 1 person would sleep and then take turns to rest. 2 people were safer than 1 person. The threat of these slaves was too great. No wonder the people in the tribe were so afraid of slaves. They didn't take the lives of their companions seriously, so they didn't have to worry too much. Xiao Xian went to the sand wall and sat down. Some sand was piled up at the foot of the wall. Xiao Xian stabbed it with the stone saber and found something. The tip of the saber lifted some sand and Xiao Xian saw a white bone. The first thing that was exposed was the skull. The evening wind blew the sand away and more parts of the skull were exposed. Xiao Xian looked at the crack on the skull, which seemed to be caused by a sharp weapon. It was not that Xiao Xian had stabbed it with a saber. The crack on the skull had been there for a long time. Looking carefully at the wound on the skull, Xiao Xian picked up the skull and gave it to Lei. Look. Lei was staring at the sand slaves fiercely. Compared to those sand slaves whose eyes were more ruthless, he heard Xiao Xian's words. He retracted his gaze and took the skull. He was not afraid of these and directly took it in his hand and looked at it carefully. Lei had followed the hunters since he was a child. He was very familiar with the wounds caused by the beast. He could distinguish which ones were man-made and which ones were injured by other beasts. Seeing the long crack on the skull, Lei's eyes flashed, and his vigilance became stronger. He no longer paid all his attention to the sand slaves, but divided a part of his attention to the surroundings. Compared with other people in the team, the people of Yanjiao knew the least about this desert. After all, they had no elders to tell them the details, so they could only judge based on their own experience. Don't expect the people of other tribes in the team to tell you much. At this time they must first take care of their own tribe, and will not pay attention to Xiao Xian, let alone talk about other things. The wound on the skull was caused by a beast's claw, which was very fast and sharp. Maybe the beast that killed the man was not big, but it could make fast and fierce attacks, so it must be guarded against. From the bone of the skull, it could be seen that the strength of the deceased was at least at the level of a junior totem warrior, maybe even higher. In any case, they had to be more careful. Because Chu Su and others were curious, Xiao Xian threw the skull to them and let them see more. Xiao Xian and the other 2 took turns to watch the night and the others did the same. The sand slaves also attacked them, but it was more like a test. They tested one by one and then picked the worst attack. Because there was no more firewood added to the fire, it soon went out and only the moonlight cast in the sky was left. Some tribes in warm areas were wrapped in 2 layers of animal skins at this time, because they were not used to such cold. Huang Yi and several elders looked at the people in the team, and finally their eyes fell on the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe. As warriors who participated in this kind of long journey for the first time, the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe were the fastest to adapt. At night they tested and fought again and again. Every once in a while there was always a sound, maybe it was the sound of weapons clashing, or the sound of being chopped and fought. There was more and more blood around, and some insects living under the sand were attracted by the blood. They crawled out and sucked the flesh and blood in the sand. If they were not full, they would target other creatures. Xiao Xian could always hear the sound of the camel's hooves stepping on the ground. When he looked over, Several insects had been trampled to death by the camel's feet. Then the camel ate all these insects. Xiao Xian didn't know if other camels were like this, but this one didn't seem to avoid meat and vegetables. This was also good because it was easy to raise. The next day when the sun came out, the sand slaves had left, and the dead sand slaves were left behind. Not long after, they became white bones again. Chapter 294. What came into view was a sea of sand. The sand dunes formed by the wind stretched into the distance. Looking up, there was no vegetation. The exposed rocks of different sizes formed a variety of strange shapes under the erosion of the wind and sand. Xiao Xian looked at the rock above his head that looked like the big head and slender neck of an ET alien. He had a feeling that the rock would not be able to withstand the wind and collapse. After half a day of trekking, the team rested here, and they could use these rocks to shelter the hot Yangguang. At this time, if an egg was hit on the ground, it would be cooked immediately. Where did the man from the Mang tribe say we were going? Tua asked. Luoya City. Xiao Xian said, it's the territory of the slave owners. 2 days after entering the desert, Huang Yi told Xiao Xian where the destination of this trip was. Before, Xiao Xian had asked many times but failed to get an answer. Only you'll know when the time comes. And on the way, Xiao Xian and the other two could clearly feel the rejection of other people. It seemed that this time they were just taking them through the motions, and they were not arranged in the plan. In particular, the people of the Tianshan tribe were not only on guard against Xiao Xian and the other two, but also with obvious hostility. They often pointed their arrows at Xiao Xian and the other two, and the two sides almost fought several times. The people of other tribes would have elders to inform them of the relevant information. Only the 3 people of Yanjiao did not say much to them. Even Chu Su and others who usually talked with the 3 people more often, wanted to say something but stopped many times. They did not dare to talk nonsense. Now they were finally told that they were going to a place called Luoya City, that belonged to a slave owner. As for the person who had kept his mouth shut previously, he was now able to reveal more and speak more casually. Some people in the team seemed to be superior when facing the 3 people of Yanjiao, probably like urban intellectuals looking at the country bumpkins. The concept of city was quite strange to the people of Yanjiao. In their knowledge, they only knew the concept of the tribe. As for city, it was vague. If there was no explanation from Xiao Xian, Lei and Tua would still be confused. A city? I really want to see if it's bigger than a tribe. By the way, Xian, who do they think is the biggest person in the city? Chief? Ray asked. No, I heard it was the Lord, said Tua. Master is called that by slaves. Others are not. Ray corrected. It's king. In the city, the highest ruler calls himself king, Xiao Xian said. From Xiao Xian's understanding of the situation, there were many slave owners in this desert, with their subordinates entrenched everywhere. The place where each slave owner lived was called a city, not the tribe that the tribesmen were familiar with. It was reasonable to say that the slave owners and the tribesmen could not coexist peacefully, but there were always a few special places that existed. Luoya City was one of the most special cities in the desert. In the past, the king of Luoya City was also a slave owner who hated the tribes very much. Generation after generation, the ruler of Luoya City was changing, and so was the style of Luoya City. The biggest change happened 20 years ago. The former Luoya City king, because of his lustful nature, snatched a lot of beautiful female slaves and gave birth to a bunch of sons and daughters. Originally, under normal circumstances, only the descendants of slave owners and slave owners could inherit the powerful abilities of their parents. Because of this, many slave owners did not take the descendants of those slaves seriously. They directly threw them into the slave trade and raised them as slaves. Until 20 years ago, there was a strong counterattack. The father of the counterattack was a slave owner, and the mother was just a low-level slave with no ability. But it was such a person who fully inherited his father's ability and talent. After adulthood, he was even stronger than his father. Later, the counterattack not only killed his slave owner father, but also the slave owner queen, along with his half-brother who was about to inherit the throne. The counterattack, who shocked many jaws, was now the highest ruler of Luoya City, the largest slave owner of Luoya City, and became the Luoya City king. When they heard this, Lei and Tua were very puzzled. Probably this was not in line with their 3 views. In the Flaming Horns tribe, even if it was a competition, it could not be fought in such a bad way, let alone brothers who were related by blood. However, after all, that was other people's family business. Besides, their chief did not find so many people to have a large number of descendants. The shaman was watching. The Luoya City king should be the best slave owner for the tribes, right? Otherwise, it would be impossible to let the tribes enter the city. Toa said. Then we have to go into the city and see, Xiao Xian said. He did not think that the Luoya city king, who cut his father and all his brothers and sisters, would look at the tribes differently. The most likely was that he used the tribes to fight against other slave owners. After all, a counterattack that shocked countless jaws, the price to pay must be quite high. Let's go, set off for Luoya city. Lei looked at the people who got up and said. After the team set off again, they walked for another 2 days. Sometimes they could not find a suitable place to rest, so they went directly into the desert. They also encountered some desert beasts that came out at night. For people were lost in the team, dragged under the sand and could no longer be found. On the 5th day of walking into the desert, the team continued to move forward under the sun. Compared with the travel teams that Xiao Xian had seen, this team was the most abused. The hot and dry air waves swept over the boundless desert. The wind was blowing and the wind was whirling. The sand was blown into a dune. Not far away, on a tall hill that looked like a mountain, some grains of sand were blown up and blew over the ridge. The main body of such a tall dune had existed for many years. It may be hundreds of years, thousands of years, or even longer. Look, there's someone over there. It was not only someone who shouted. Looking sideways, there was a tall hill in the distance. On the ridge, there was a group of people walking on a camel. Who is that? Which city's slaves? I can't see clearly. I don't know which city they are from, but looking at the direction they are going, they should be from Luoya city, right? Someone said. Don't worry about it. Keep going, we're almost there, an elder said. When encountering slaves, as long as those slaves did not take the initiative to look for trouble, the travel team would not attack them at will. They had to save their strength to hurry on the road and did not want to spend more effort to deal with those slaves. As they continued to move forward, Xiao Xian found that the team was going in the same direction as them, and the camel he was leading began to get excited. Did they see the same kind? Xiao Xian pulled the somewhat excited camel and did not let it rush forward. There seemed to be some other smells in the air, floating with the wind. The camel next to him was even more excited, and it seemed to want to run over. Not in the direction of the team but directly ahead. Luoya city? Lei also smelled other smells in the air. Because they often hunted, they were very sensitive to the changes in the surrounding smells. In addition to the changes in smells, there were also some sounds. After another hill, Xiao Xian saw the destination of their trip, Luoya city. At this time, the sun was already slanting towards the horizon. The orange sunset shone on the vast desert, and looking ahead, there were large tracts of leaves with the same color as the sunset. The orange trees, the orange sunset, and the desert city that was dyed by the setting sun. It is said that the most common tree in Luoya city is the sunset tree. Because the color of the leaves is similar to the sunset, it never changes color all year round, so it was named. Even the symbol of Luoya city is the deciduous tree. It is said that deciduous trees live for thousands of years without dying, thousands of years without falling, and thousands of years without falling. It's just hearsay, no one knows the truth. However, looking around, there are indeed large tracts of sunset trees in Luoya city, and seeing these trees makes people feel cool. After walking in the desert for so many days, in addition to sand and stones, now it is rare to see so many plants, and their mood is a lot better. In addition to those sunset trees, there are some unknown grasses around the city. Although not much, they do exist. No wonder the camel next to them was so excited, it was aware of food. Standing on the sand dune and looking at Luoya city, in addition to the conspicuous trees with the same color as the sunset, there is also a tall building. Below the building are huge stones like a pyramid, and above it is a house built. The highest place in Luoya city is where the king lives. An elder of the Hui tribe said. Chapter 295. At the highest point was the king's palace. It was indeed a place where one could overlook the whole city. I heard that a lot of slaves died in order to build that high place. Someone sighed. This was the difference between a tribe and a slave owner. In the tribe, few people would deliberately build such a place. At most, they would build the house on a high place such as a tree or a mountain, and would not spend a lot of manpower and material resources to build a high palace. Let's go, we can rest in the city tonight, Wang Yi said. Other people rarely raised their spirits, and they were very curious about the city where the slave owners lived. Around Luoya city, the walls were built with sand with an average height of about 10 meters, which looked very old. There were some people around the walls, these were all slaves. In the territory of the slave owners, slaves accounted for the majority. The dark-skinned and cracked slaves looked at the people coming over, holding sharpened spears in their hands, and shouted something loudly. Xiao Xian didn't understand their words, but someone in the team understood. He replied and then threw a palm-sized thing over. That should be some kind of proof. Sure enough, after seeing that thing, the slaves guarding the gate stepped aside, and the huge wooden door opened with a click. Xiao Xian and the other two followed the team in. As for Cha-Cha, it followed the two eagles of the Hui tribe. It was not their first time here, so they knew where to go. In the city, some sand houses could be seen everywhere, and they were densely packed. Those were not big and irregular in shape. They were more like nests than houses, which looked like they would collapse at any time. This was where the lowly slaves lived. As they continued to walk forward, they could see some bigger houses made of stone. In the corner of Wuxia City, there was a place where there were not many slave activities, and the people who lived there were mostly tribesmen. Xiao Xian, like others, thought that there was an absolute contradiction between the tribes and the slave owners before coming here, but this was not the case. Tribes would show different attitudes towards different slave owners, and the king of Wuxia City was like a cooperative relationship with the tribes. There were some places that resembled embassies here. Other than the people in the team, there were also some tribesmen stationed here. They had probably lived here for a long time, so their skin was a lot darker. If you ignored their tribal clothing, they didn't look much different from the people in the city. The other tribes had special resting places in Wuxia City, but the Yanjiao trio who came here for the first time were in an awkward situation. Because there was no special embassy, the three of them could only be arranged to stay in some small sand huts. These huts were previously used to store sundries, but they were temporarily vacated for the three of them. When they entered the huts, they could smell a rotten smell. In the eyes of the others, the three people from the Yanjiao tribe were just there to go through the motions. They wouldn't be informed of any plans or activities. Xiao Xian and the other two were already aware of this feeling of rejection. However, they didn't know how long they would have to stay in such a place. The three of them were unhappy. Ray pushed the stone wall beside him and said contemptuously, "Not strong enough. Let's stay here for the night first. Tomorrow we'll look for stones to build a house." Xiao Xian said. Since they knew that the tribes could have a station here, the Yanjiao tribe certainly had to build one here. Even if it wasn't for the three of them, they had to provide benefits for the Yanjiao people who came later. They didn't want to live in such a broken house when they came. Although the house was bad, it was much better than sleeping in the desert a few days ago. The three of them rested in the house for a night, and when they woke up the next day, their spirits were much better. The camel was tied outside the house by Xiao Xian. In the morning, Xiao Xian fed it some water. The surrounding grass had been eaten by it, so Xiao Xian would have to find something for it to eat. Tuo looked at the luggage and camel in the house and took the time to ask the other tribes. It was best to know where there were more stones near Wuxia City. Ray followed Xiao Xian and went to other places in Wuxia City to see, at least to know the general situation in the city. Leaving the place where the tribes lived, Xiao Xian found that in Wuxia City, many people did not wear animal skins but mostly linen. The temperature was high during the day, so many people simply wrapped a few pieces of linen. Xiao Xian and the other two were told that in Wuxia City, it was best to avoid the slave owners. In a city there was more than one slave owner, but there was only one big slave owner, and that was the king. Other slave owners did not have many slaves under their hands, but in the city their status was higher than the slaves. No matter how high it was, it could not be higher than the king of the city. There were also trading places here, but Xiao Xian found that the language and writing here was another set. It was not the same as the tribal language and was more complicated. Xiao Xian intended to use the shell coins in his hand to buy some food. When he could not find prey, he would temporarily eat food. Here, shell coins and many other popular trading items in the tribes could be used here, but they were seriously devalued. After all, in the slave owner's place, as long as the slave owner lived well, the requirements of the slaves did not matter. The slave owners of Wuxia City liked beautiful cloth and jade, and naturally cloth and jade were expensive. Perhaps this was the main reason why the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe had the best living conditions here. Among all the tribal embassies, the two embassies were the largest. In the place where food was sold, the people in charge were also slaves. The slaves engaged in this kind of work did not seem to be aggressive, and they also understood the tribal language. It was just that when Xiao Xian took out the shell coins, their eyes were contemptuous, and they said a few words in a language that Xiao Xian did not understand. It was not a good thing to look at, and Ray was so angry that he almost hit him. "You said that you are a slave? What qualifications do you have to look down on people?" However, in the territory of the slave owners, these slaves could really throw the tribe's face. After all, this was the place of the slave owners. For the slaves here, the slave owners were the first and the slaves were the second, and the tribespeople were ranked behind the two. After buying food, Xiao Xian did not walk a few steps, and he heard a noise not far away. What is that? Ray looked over there and asked. Slave owners. Over there, 4 dark and strong slaves were carrying a simple wooden sedan. The sedan was not closed around it and there was no roof on top. Instead, it was covered with a piece of cloth of different colors. When the wind blew, the cloth swayed and the people sitting inside could be seen through the gaps of the cloth. The person being carried was a woman, and her specific age could not be seen. Anyway, she was not young. Her face was painted with various colors of paint, and the original appearance could not be seen. The people carrying the sedan stopped all the way, and sometimes they stopped at the place where wine was sold. The person on the sedan directly reached out her hand, and someone would hold a colored pottery cup with fruit wine and offer it. From time to time, someone would hand over a fruit, a piece of barbecue, or a stone bracelet. The person on the sedan did not need to pay anything in exchange. All she needed to do was to reach out her hand. This was the absolute class. The life of the slave owners is really good, Ray said with emotion. Remembering the warnings of the other people in the team, Xiao Xian saw the person being carried coming over here, and quickly left with Ray. In the territory of the slave owners, they could not reason with them. Right and wrong were defined by them. Chapter 296. After walking around outside, Xiao Xian got limited information, but the status of the slave owners here gave Xiao Xian and Lei some idea. In this city, the slave owners were the masters and right and wrong were defined by them. What bothered Xiao Xian was the words and language of the slave owners. His understanding of the language used by the slave owners was limited to the words engraved on the slaves, because those words also appeared in tribal communication. Xiao Xian had seen them in other travel teams before, so he knew them. But here it was difficult. Xiao Xian's side was not going well, and Tua, who stayed in the broken house, did not get good news either. Can't act at will? After hearing Tuo's words, Xiao Xian began to think about what to do next. According to Tua, the people of the surrounding tribes told him that whether it was inside or outside the city, if there was no specific permission and pass token, it was easy to be regarded as an enemy and attacked. The so-called special permission should be the kind of token that the team showed when entering the city, but Xiao Xian did not have it now. That kind of token was not easy to get. The other people who had been here for many years only had 1 or 2 tokens. They would not be so generous as to share it with Xiao Xian and the other 2. After all, they did not have enough for themselves. Unable to travel at will, finding stones to build a house had to be put aside for the time being. Let's put aside the matter of building a house first. I'll go find someone. After resting in the house for a while, Xiao Xian went to the Mang tribe to find Huang Yi, but the people of the Mang tribe seemed to be discussing something today. Huang Yi had no time, so Xiao Xian went to the Hui tribe and saw Cha-Cha, who was staying with the 2 eagles of the Hui tribe. The people of the Hui tribe were there. Xiao Xian shamelessly asked for advice from an elder named He Shi. This elder had also helped Xiao Xian on this trip. Although he didn't help much, his attitude was there. Xiao Xian did not look for the token they wanted to pass through, but asked He Shi if there was anyone who was proficient in the language and writing of the slave owners. He could pay some compensation in exchange. The Hui tribe had several people who stayed here for a long time. They had been here for more than 10 years. Now they had nothing to do, so they could help Xiao Xian. By the way, can you tell me something about the slave owners in Luoya City? Today I met a female slave owner outside. Xiao Xian talked about today's things, hoping to get some information from He Shi. If Xiao Xian didn't ask, He Shi wouldn't have taken the initiative to tell him. However, since Xiao Xian asked, he didn't hide anything. He couldn't say much about other things, but this was fine. When he was in the tribe, He Shi heard Gula mention Xiao Xian and the eagle named Cha-Cha. After seeing it, He Shi's impression of Xiao Xian was also good. He Shi was more calm and did not say too much nonsense. A few simple words could let Xiao Xian have a general understanding of the slave owners in the city. The big slave owner of Luoya City, the Luoya City king, was called Su Luan. Since Su Luan's counterattack 20 years ago, the slave owners in the city had been reduced a lot. Now, the few slave owners who were still alive and had relatively high status, in addition to Su Luan's 2 half-sisters, were his 3 sons. Originally there were 5 sons, but 2 of them did not survive for various reasons. Now there were only 3 left, the eldest young master Su Ka, the second young master Su Lu, and the third young master Su Gu. They were born to different women. In the past 2 years, the competition between the 3 young masters of Luoya City had become more and more fierce. Although the Luoya City king had cooperation with the tribes, he often did not care much about the affairs of the tribes. Therefore, many of the small things in his eyes, he directly adopted an indifferent attitude. On the contrary, the several young masters could help a lot. Of course, there was also a mutually beneficial relationship. The people of the tribes could get some convenience and news from the young masters of Luoya City to deal with their own tribal matters. At the same time, they could also give some credit to the young masters of Luoya City, so that they could gain more advantages in the competition and fully brush their presence in the Luoya City king. The Hui tribe has a deal with the second young master Sulu? Xiao Xian said. Just now, when she mentioned the three young masters, there was a pause at the second young master Sulu. She looked at Xiao Xian and did not refute. The people of the tribes used the slaves of other cities as whetstones. They hoped that in this way they could train the young warriors with potential in their tribes. Only in constant battles could they become more and more courageous. At the same time, it also made them vigilant and defensive against the slave owners. The so-called know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. If they only stayed in the tribe, it would be too comfortable and their vision would be too narrow. Just like many warriors who had not really come into contact with slaves, they always thought that slaves were some low-class people who could be cut down at will. But in fact, this was not the case. Xiao Xian wanted to ask which young master the other tribes had a deal with, but she did not answer this question. Seeing that Xiao Xian seemed to be interested in this, she reminded him, if you want to make a deal with the young masters of Luoya City, it is best to choose the eldest young master Su Ka and the second young master Su Lu, the youngest one. What about the youngest one? Xiao Xian asked. The youngest one, it is said that until now, he has no slaves of his own. The more slaves there were, the more wealth and strength the slave owner had. This was a direct indication of that. Slave owners had the ability to enslave, to give power to those who had no faith and then enslave them. Until now, not having a slave of his own was quite a failure for a slave owner. The three young masters of Luoya City did not have a big age difference. However, from the slaves they owned, it was easy to see the advantages and disadvantages. Did anyone choose the youngest one? Xiao Xian asked again. No. Xiao Xian nodded. I understand, thank you. In the next few days, Xiao Xian went back and forth to the Hui tribe's stronghold every day, learning the language of the slave owners from the Hui tribe's warriors. The language and writing of the slave owners was not too difficult or complicated. Xiao Xian's memory was good and he learned quickly. 3 days later, Xiao Xian had learned almost everything. In his hand, he also had an animal skin roll with the words used by the slave owners. He would go back and consolidate it. Usually he would walk on the street and listen more. He believed that it would not take long for him to become proficient. On this day, Xiao Xian, who had been in the house for a few days because of learning the language of the slave owners, took Tuo out for a walk. This time Lei stayed in the house. Although the things on the streets of Luoya City could only be called simple and crude, it was not as lively as the markets between the tribes. However, some of them were quite novel, such as some animals, herbs, ornaments and so on. It was just bad luck today that he saw the female slave owner who was being carried again. According to what she told Xiao Xian, this should be one of the 2 half-sisters of the current Luoya City king. As the only 2 surviving siblings, there must be a reason for them to survive. Xiao Xian speculated based on the information he learned that these 2 were either very smart or very brainless. In any case, Xiao Xian did not intend to deal with these slave owners now. He had not decided which young master of Luoya City to look for. There were only 3 people from Yanjiao and they were not famous here. He did not know if the cooperation would be smooth. Just as Xiao Xian and Tuo were about to leave, there was a shout from the other side. It was the voice of the female slave owner coming from the wooden palanquin. Xiao Xian pretended not to understand and did not pay attention to it. Who would have thought that before they could leave, the slaves in front of them had already blocked the way? Stop. This time the slave owner used the tribal language, but it sounded a bit awkward. Tuo looked at Xiao Xian, his hand already holding the hilt of his sword. Xiao Xian signaled him to be calm and turned to look at the female slave owner who was being carried here. Who are you? A hand wearing a variety of ornaments lifted the cloth covering the front of the wooden palanquin, revealing the face that could not be seen. The voice was arrogant. Yinjiao tribe, Xiao Xian replied. Oh, Yinjiao tribe? Never heard of it. The voice said slowly, but it doesn't matter. It must not be a big tribe. Would you like to follow me? The words had a sense of charity, as if being her slave was a very honorable thing. Following a slave owner meant being a slave, not a cooperation. Tuo's eyes flashed with anger. He was about to draw his sword, but was blocked by Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked at the person on the wooden palanquin, not interested. The hand on the wooden palanquin loosened, and the opened cloth was closed again. A soft humph came from inside. Beside the wooden palanquin, a tall and sturdy man strode forward with a large stone hammer in his hand. Every step he took caused the ground to tremble, and the sand and stones on the ground were sent flying, leaving behind deep footprints. Looking at the word on his face, he was a servant slave. Not letting Tuo move, Xiao Xian took 2 steps forward. When the other party swung his arm down, he dodged sideways. His hand stretched out, directly grabbing the handle of the long stone hammer in the other party's hand, and then his wrists fiercely pulled. The slave holding the handle of the hammer suddenly felt as if his hands were being grilled in a hot desert. He wanted to grab the handle of the hammer, but he could not resist this greater force. Although he clenched it tightly, the handle of the hammer was still dragged out of his hand. Under this moment of tyrannical force, the servant slave's arms were abruptly dislocated. The servant slave who had lost his stone hammer was kicked away by Xiao Xian. He flew out more than 10 meters before landing on the ground. He wanted to get up, but the pain all over his body made him sweat like beans. He couldn't get up for a while. The people who had been standing outside the crowd saw this scene. Their pupils shrank and then they flashed with joy. When the person on the wooden palanquin was about to call out more people, he shouted, "Stop!" Hearing this voice, the people who were still around just now shuddered away. One by one they bowed their heads and said, "Young master." The people who were ready to fight also put away their ferocious momentum. One by one they became like quails in an instant. When did Luoya City force the tribesmen to be slaves? The person came over and said righteously. Xiao Xian heard this and his mouth twitched. "You've been watching from the side for so long and now you jump out. Who are you trying to scare?" Chapter 297. The person who came looked to be 14 or 15 years old, not as dark as the other slaves. He wore clean cloth clothes and also had a lot of ornaments. There were bright gems and some bone ornaments. In Luoya City it was a luxurious type. As long as one was not blind, they could see that this was a slave owner in the city. The slaves around him called him a young master. Xiao Xian thought about the information of the 3 slave owners' young masters in the city. The most likely one was the youngest third young master, Sugu. It was said that until now, he had not been able to own a slave as a waste. The other tribes did not choose to make a deal with him. No matter how much of a waste he was still a young master in the city, and the slaves had to respect him. At this time, the third young master, who thought that he made a dazzling appearance, raised his chin and swept his eyes around with a disdainful attitude. Seeing that everyone was showing respect, his eyes showed satisfaction, and then looked at the wooden sedan. After the third young master came out, the person on the wooden sedan was like a mute. He did not speak, and the momentum of the people carrying the sedan also weakened a bit. He believed that the person on the wooden sedan was the same. It was the same humph, but this time it was not as strong as before. It seemed a little guilty. "Go." The person on the wooden sedan threw out a colored pottery wine cup, venting his anger. The colored pottery wine cup fell to the ground and immediately shattered. Xiao Xian looked at it. The colored pottery wine cup was exquisitely made. The wall of the cup was very thin, and the pattern on the cup was very complex. If it was taken to the tribe who loved pottery, it would certainly be a treasure. But here it was casually used as an object to vent. The slaves worked hard to make things, but for the slave owners, it was just a casual thing. After the wooden sedan disappeared, the people around also dispersed. Sugu's eyes swept over Xiao Xian and Tuo as if looking at goods. It was estimated that he himself did not know how much his eyes were asking for a beating. However, he still thought that his attitude was kind, showing a smile to Xiao Xian and Tuo. Xiao Xian, Tuo. They wanted to beat him even more. "Which tribe are you from? I haven't seen you in the city before." "My name is Sugu, the third young master of Luoya City." Sugu came over and pretended to be curious. "Yanjiao tribe, Xiao Xian, Tuo." Xiao Xian introduced. "Yanjiao. Looking at your strength, your tribe is definitely not weak." Sugu said. "It's not up to me to say whether he's strong or not," Xiao Xian said. "Is this your first time here?" "Yes." "What are your plans?" "I'm just a bystander." "With soy sauce." After asking a few more questions, Sugu couldn't get what he wanted to know from Xiao Xian. Instead he panicked. Finally he couldn't help but cough and say, "Actually, you new tribesmen don't have a pass token. It's really inconvenient." Xiao Xian and Tuo glanced at him without saying anything. After waiting for a while, Sugu said, "I can get you a token." After that, he smiled at Xiao Xian and Tua. Xiao Xian and Tua glanced at him again, still not speaking. Xiao Xian told Tua Lele about the information he had heard. Therefore, Tua also knew that the one in front of him was the most useless of the three contenders for the throne. No tribe was willing to trade with him. In Tuo's view, such a weak person was indeed not necessary to trade cooperation. However, here everything was decided by Xiao Xian. At this time he would not talk nonsense. Seeing Xiao Xian and Tua silent, Sugu thought they did not understand what was going on, so he said, "You can cooperate with me and make a deal. Both sides will benefit." "We're poor," Xiao Xian said. "It's okay. I'm not poor." Sugu waved his hand. "I'm unfamiliar with this place," Xiao Xian said. "It doesn't matter. I'm familiar with it." Sugu smiled. "We only have 3 people," Xiao Xian said again. "The 3 of you must be very powerful people." Sugu's smile was a bit stiff. He didn't know if he was answering Xiao Xian or convincing himself. Xiao Xian looked at Sugu again and said, "Thank you for today. As for the cooperation, let's go back and discuss it first." "Only 3 people and they still have to go back and discuss it?" The smile on Sugu's face became more and more reluctant. "When will the discussion result come out?" "We'll reply tomorrow," Xiao Xian said. "Good." Xiao Xian and the other 2 did not immediately agree, but they also did not immediately refuse. With such a thought, Sugu's mood was better. After the 2 sides separated, Tua sighed, "This third young master seems to be different from other slave owners. If it were another slave owner, it would certainly not be so easy to talk to. In fact, it's not much worse. It's just that he was forced into a corner," Xiao Xian said. "A person who has not had an exclusive slave so far, nor has he cooperated with any tribe to trade, had no merits, and could not come up with anything to fight with his 2 brothers. He was almost removed from the list of candidates for the throne, and was just making a final struggle. Whether to cooperate or not, Xiao Xian really had to think carefully about it. The Yanjiao 3 people were indeed in a weak position here, and could not compare to the other tribes. The other 2 young masters may not necessarily look at them in the eye, and cooperation was very difficult. Even if they succeeded, they would not be taken seriously. Coming here, Xiao Xian did not really intend to hide. He wanted to know more information, and the other tribes were always hiding and guarding. In this way, cooperating with the local people was indeed a good thing. Sugu was a waste. Perhaps, but to be able to live healthily until now, how could he be a real waste? When Xiao Xian returned to the broken house in the tribal area, the camel at the door was chewing hay. This hay was a kind of grass that grew in the city. It was as thick as a finger and had a long hollow stem. The camel seemed to like it very much. Xiao Xian stared at the small pile of hay there, thinking. The camel chewed on the hay and saw that Xiao Xian had been staring at its hay. It moved its body to block Xiao Xian's line of sight. Who knew that the next moment Xiao Xian directly reached out and pulled out 2 from inside. "Ong, fart, take 2 and use them. Tomorrow I'll pull some back for you." Recently, because of the lack of water, there were a lot of dead grass in some places in the city. Lei and Tua saw Xiao Xian grab the camel's hay and bring it into the house. They thought that Xiao Xian wanted to chew it by himself. However, after Xiao Xian entered the house, he just picked up the hay and then closed his eyes. After a few breaths, Xiao Xian's fingers moved and began to tie a knot with the hay. Lei gave Tua a look. "What is Xian doing?" Tua shook his head. No matter what Xiao Xian did, they just had to wait. After a while, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked at the grass knot that had been formed in his hand. He could not help but frown. Seeing Xiao Xian's serious face, Tua asked, "Xian, what's wrong?" "Nothing, I intend to cooperate with Sugu," Xiao Xian said. Lei opened his mouth but still did not say a word against it. When they came out, the shaman and the chief said that the matter would be decided by Xiao Xian. The next day, early in the morning, Xiao Xian had not yet gone out when Sugu came to find him. For the tribal area in the city, although he did not cooperate with any tribe, he still knew this place. He also knew where Xiao Xian and the other 2 lived. They did not expect Sugu to personally come to their door. Lei and Tua were also surprised. "What do you think?" Sugu asked when he entered the door. Xiao Xian did not directly answer but said, "You'd better avoid the water today." "Water? How long has it been since it rained? Where did the water come from? Did the water that he usually drank count? Wouldn't he die of thirst?" Hearing this, Sugu felt that Xiao Xian was playing with him. His eyes flashed with hostility, but it quickly converged. He looked at Xiao Xian with a serious face and asked, "Why do you say that?" After today, if you are still willing, we will cooperate. Xiao Xian did not care about the anger on Su Gu's face. Good. You wait. Su Gu clenched his fists, feeling that he was condescending to this point. Xiao Xian and the other two really did not know how to appreciate favors. He also felt that this matter seemed to be a bit wrong. Seeing Xiao Xian like this, his heart felt strange. After thinking about it, he waved his hand and went out of the house. Thus, on this day, many people saw the three young masters of Luoya City rush into the tribal area and come out with a cold face. Chapter 298. After Xiao Xian saw Su Gu, he had the intention to cooperate with this person. He felt that this person was a bit strange, but he couldn't tell where it was. He always felt that this person's strength should not be limited to this. After returning to the tribal area because he couldn't figure it out, he saw the camel chewing the hay happily. Xiao Xian then had the idea of divination. On the way here with the team, Xiao Xian also tried several divination, calculating the sandstorms and other weather changes in the desert. As for more distant or more complicated things, there were many times when he couldn't figure it out. The knots he made entangled his fingers. His ability was not enough. When he tied the knot, no one else saw it. The conclusion was also fed to the camel. Therefore, only Tuo and Lei knew that Xiao Xian tied the knot. This time Xiao Xian just intended to try it. If the knot was successful, it would naturally be good. If it failed, it didn't matter. He just needed to choose the best choice at the moment. What he wanted to do was related to the third young master, and he really divined something. The conclusion only foreshadowed today's water, which was more dangerous. It just so happened that the third young master, who couldn't wait to make an alliance, took the initiative to come here. Xiao Xian told him. As for whether he listened or not, Xiao Xian couldn't control it. If the third young master couldn't withstand it, then there was no need for an alliance. On the other side, the third young master Su Gu, who left the tribal area with a straight face, had no intention of strolling around and went straight to the center of the city. The center of Luoya City was the place where the slave owners lived. Whether it was the slave owners with a very low sense of existence in the city, or the several hotly discussed young masters of Luoya City, they were all concentrated in the center of the city. However, the difference was that the king and the young masters could live in the highest palace, while the other slave owners could not set foot there without the king's permission. Otherwise they would be killed without mercy. Talking about friendship with the king was courting death. As long as they were not too tired, they had to abide by the rules. As soon as they saw Su Gu's face, the slaves hurriedly got out of the way for fear of being angered. Su Gu, who was walking inside, was stopped. Hearing this voice, Su Gu frowned and impatiently looked over there. What's the matter? The female slave owner Suya, who was dressed in blue, with blue patterns on her face and various jewelry on her hands, slowly walked over. Behind her, there were two slaves holding fruits and water, following closely behind her. She was one of the two remaining royal sisters, and also the one who had caused trouble for Xiao Xian and the others yesterday. However, at this moment she did not ask anyone to carry her. I've already done what I promised you. What about the thing? Suya raised his fingers, smeared with bluegrass juice, and reached out to Su Gu. She promised Su Gu to test the people of the Yanjiao tribe, but after returning yesterday, the gem that Su Gu promised was not delivered. This morning she did not find anyone, so she personally came here to wait, just in time to stop Su Gu. I'll have someone send it to you later. Su Gu did not look at Suya again. After replying, he left. Looking at Su Gu's back, Suya squinted and sneered, just a waste, yet you still want to cross with me. If it were not for those beautiful gems, she would be too lazy to pay attention to Su Gu. A person who did not even have an exclusive slave would sooner or later be driven out of the palace. Her line of sight was withdrawn from the high steps. Suya took the two slaves with her and left. She just came to collect the debt and did not care about other things. Su Gu walked up the steps. Before entering the palace, he turned around to look. Standing on the high palace platform of the royal city, many places in the city could be seen. This feeling of looking down on everything was what every slave owner hoped for. Did he want to be a king? Naturally he wanted to. If the other two brothers inherited the throne, Su Gu's own end could be imagined. It was not so cruel before, but since the success of the current Luoya City King's counterattack, it gave the slave owners a lesson and opened a new door for those ambitious slave owners. And when they stood at the peak, everyone who was a threat to them would be cut down, leaving no chance for them to turn the tables. Thinking of his own ability, Su Gu clenched his fists. In the past, his father, Luoya City King Su Luan, gave the several young masters the same resources. However, from this year onwards there was a deviation. Sugu got a lot less resources. For Sugu this was not a good thing. Walking to his residence, Sugu took a few mouthfuls of water from the colored pottery cup handed over by the slave. Putting down the cup, Sugu looked at the slaves around him. These were the resources given by his father. None of them were his own. In recent years his two brothers had more and more slaves around them. In addition to the ones given by his father, the two brothers also had some slaves that belonged to them. Looking at Sugu's place, it was still the same. No, it was less. Those slaves died for various reasons. Because he was not capable enough, he could not have his own exclusive slaves. As soon as he saw these slaves, Sugu's chest tightened. He waved his hand to signal these slaves to get out of the way and not be an eyesore. After sitting down, Sugu recalled today's events. He thought of the Yinjiao tribe's words called Xiao Xian. Just as he was about to continue drinking water, Sugu's eyes drooped, looking at the water in the cup. Drinking was not right, not drinking was also not right. He was thirsty, but Xiao Xian's words were like a thorn, stabbing him when he saw the water. Really, very angry. Snap. Throwing the cup on the ground, Sugu glanced at the splashed water stains on the ground. He thought, the people of the Flaming Horns tribe must be fooling me. They must think that I'm a waste and there's no need for cooperation. So, they fabricated such a sentence to fool me? Sugu wanted to put Xiao Xian's words behind his head, but every time he could not achieve it. He was also afraid of death. Xiao Xian's words, the more he thought about it, the more he felt cold. Tribesman, Wuxia. Sugu suddenly said. A figure like a ghost silently appeared in front of Sugu. He bowed his head with respect, but was not as humble as the other slaves. Among the resources provided by the Luoya city king to his several sons, in addition to the servant slaves and the Thai slaves, there were also two higher-level staff-level slaves. However, one of them, in order to protect Sugu when he went out of the city, was dragged under the sand by a beast in the desert and died. Now only this staff-level slave called Wuxia was left. Third young master. Wuxia said. Wuxia, I know you have some understanding of the tribesmen. You say, can the tribesmen really predict good or bad luck? Sugu asked. Wuxia thought for a moment and replied, I heard that the tribesmen have witches, and witches may indeed have that ability. Hearing this, Sugu's face relaxed a little. There really was such an ability. Wuxia's words were not finished as he continued, but the tribesmen generally do not let their witches leave the tribe too far. Even if they leave, there will be layers of protection. The bigger the tribe, the tighter the protection. In many tribes, the status of the witches is only second to their leader. Sugu's face changed. He thought that there were only 3 young people from the Yinjiao tribe. Naturally, it was impossible for them to have witches. It looked like they were just ordinary warriors and not witches. That is to say, they are really lying to me. Almost every word was squeezed out from between his teeth. Sugu was so angry that he stomped his feet. The pottery on the table was all overturned. The other slaves around him could not wait to shrink into an egg and did not dare to immediately come forward to clean up. Although they were slaves thrown by the king, now that they were here with the young master, they still had to look at the young master's face. Otherwise, they would be slaughtered by the young master. Moreover, their level was not as good as Wuxia. At this time they could only shrink. Sugu smashed the things in the house. His anger subsided a little. He felt that the house was too stuffy and planned to go out for a walk. Out of the door, Sugu did not know why, but he remembered Xiao Xian's words. He stood at the door and paced back and forth a few times. After 2 steps he turned back and shouted, Wuxia, still don't follow me? Wuxia's eyes flashed with surprise. This young master was usually very annoyed with slaves following him. Unless he went out of the city, as long as he was in the city, he would not bring a slave with him. He probably felt that it was not good to bring other people's slaves with him. But now he let him follow. No matter what he thought in his heart, Wuxia still followed. Probably also felt that his style was inconsistent with his usual. Sugu's face changed a few times. He turned around and walked away quickly. The king's palace on the high platform was mostly not made of stone, but wood. It was the famous sunset tree in Luoya City that was rumored to be immortal for 1,000 years. In Luoya City, only the slave owners could use the sunset tree to build houses. Other slaves did not have this qualification. The main material to build the palace was the carefully selected sunset tree. The palace had the smell of the sunset tree. Sugu looked in front of him. There was a small pool where his father raised a turtle. Water? Around. Several slaves came out of the wine cellar with a few sharp-bottom wine jars. What? There was water? Avoid it again. A group of slaves carried a large wooden box from outside the palace. The wooden box was made of sunset tree and belonged to the slave owners of the Luoya royal city. Seeing this wooden box, Su Gu knew that their water source had come. In addition to owning the city, the Luoya city king also owned a small oasis. The water they drank was transported from the oasis. Although there were several deep wells in the city, the water inside was very turbid. Moreover, if one drank the turbid water from the wells for a long time, the skin would easily dry up and crack. This was one of the reasons why most of the slaves in the city had dry cracks on their skin. Most of the slave owners were a group of people who enjoyed life. They had higher requirements in terms of material life. Therefore, every once in a while, the Luoya city king would let people bring water from a distant oasis for the slave owners to enjoy. Therefore, after seeing the big wooden box, Su Gu did not intend to pay much attention to it at first. But thinking that it was also related to water, he moved his feet and turned to the side. Wuxia, who was behind Su Gu, saw this and was very puzzled. He pondered, today the third young master's brain was filled with sand again? Why was he acting so strange? However, thinking that his usual behavior was not normal, Wuxia did not think much about it. All he did was follow the young master. Chapter 299. Not far away there was a door where the wooden box carrying water would be put down. The guarding slaves would take out the pots full of water and then put them in the place where the water was stored, waiting for the slave owners to enjoy them. Su Gu's line of sight swept over there. He did not feel that it was inappropriate, but he felt that his behavior was a bit cowardly. He was quite ashamed, but the thorn in his heart stabbed again, so he chose to avoid that side and detour. If there was no accident afterwards, the three people from Yanjiao, you just wait. Su Gu's heart cursed. Wuxia, who was behind Su Gu, did not know what the young master was thinking at the moment and just slowly followed. Walking and walking, Wuxia's heart suddenly raised a chill, and the hair on the back of his neck instantly stood up. Young master. Su Gu was walking when he heard Wuxia's shout. Then he was picked up. All he saw was the fast-retreating scenery. Boom. The big wooden box that was originally being carried exploded. The flying splashes and pottery shards whistled past Su Gu's ears, hitting the surrounding wooden walls, making a pop sound, just like a dense arrow flying. With the explosion of the wooden box, the splashes and pottery scattered, and three figures rushed out from inside. The man, who was originally like a flattened tree bark, had doubled in size when he rushed out. They were different from ordinary slaves. There were no slave marks related to the slave owners on their bodies, and there were no words tattooed on their faces. These slaves were specially trained for assassinations. Just like the death warriors, they had no intention of leaving once they arrived. They had their eyes fixed on the target. Their purpose should be to rush into the interior of the palace and assassinate the city's largest slave owner, Luoya City King Su Luan. The surrounding slaves shouted, as well as the beast-like roars of the assassins. From calm to austere, the air was full of suffocating killing intent. In an instant, the blood overflowed. Su Gu was carried to a place far away from the battlefield. He caught a glimpse of a red and white liquid spurting from not far away, along with the sound of broken bones and an abrupt scream. Bang! Shortly after Su Gu left, several figures were hit by a violent force. They slammed into the wooden wall and instantly penetrated the wooden wall that Su Gu had just passed through. The people who were hit through the wall fell to the ground. Their bodies were distorted and badly mutilated. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. These were the slaves who guarded the palace in Luoya City. The trunk of the sunset tree was much sturdier than that of ordinary trees. The older it was, the sturdier it became. The slave owners in the city sometimes used sunset trees to make spears, arrows, and so on. The tribesmen who came and went, especially those who liked to use arrows, would take out a lot of things to exchange for sunset trees. Many of the wood used in the palace were sunset trees that were more than 100 years old. Those hard wooden walls, even if not as good as stone walls, were enough to block the general's slaves. However, at this time, Su Gu only heard the sound of the walls being broken. The trees that were usually called the hardest in the desert were so vulnerable at this time. Wuxia carried Su Gu and gradually left the battlefield. There were still sounds of fighting and killing. At the edge of the palace, Wuxia stopped to rest. There were many wounds on his back, but fortunately they were not fatal. He had also escaped quickly, so the danger had passed for the time being. However, if he had been a little closer to that side, he might not have had time to escape. It was lucky, otherwise he would follow in the footsteps of the former servant. Wuxia thought. Looking at the young master who was brought here, Wuxia found that the young master's state was somewhat wrong. His eyes were only staring ahead, unfocused. He did not know what he was thinking. Was he scared silly? Although this time it was indeed dangerous, this kind of assassination happened every year. As a competitor for the king, his courage should not be so small. Young master. Wuxia probed. Sugu did not answer. Third young master? Wuxia increased his volume. Sugu still did not greet him. Third young master, are you okay? Wuxia reached out and poked him. Sugu, who was immersed in his thoughts, almost jumped up in shock. Third young master, are you okay? Wuxia asked again. No, nothing. Sugu's voice trembled a little. Was he really scared? Wuxia thought. Ignoring Wuxia, Sugu carefully listened to the movement over there. After the other side slowly calmed down, Sugu said, let's go and see. Distinguishing the sound over there, Wuxia knew that it was temporarily handled, but he did not know if there were other unknown assassins. However, at this time the young master said that he wanted to go and he could not stop him. He could only protect him and go there. Around the broken wooden walls, the red blood was very conspicuous. The dead slaves were being dragged away. In the collapsed places there were also slaves cleaning up. Sugu saw a person who fell to the ground. That person was not a slave of Wuxia city, but an assassin. He signaled Wuxia to remove the sawdust covering the top. Sugu carefully looked at the dead assassin. The assassin had many injuries on his body, and all of them were pierced by sharp weapons. However, even with such injuries he persisted for a period of time. His vitality was much stronger than the average slave. On their hands, the black raised finger bones seemed to be a sharp blade dipped in poison, shining with a cold light. There were no special signs on their bodies, so they could not see which city they were from. These people usually hid very well, making it difficult to detect their breath. Otherwise, they would not have been carried all the way from the oasis to here. These were specially trained slaves for assassination. These slaves were carefully trained from childhood until they were sent on a task. Their entire lives were dedicated to an assassination. Such slaves were extremely dangerous, and also a sharp butcher knife in the hands of the big slave owners. The competition between the big slave owners, in addition to a few open desert battles from time to time, there was also a steady stream of assassinations. Sugu knew that his father's men also had them, but no one had ever seen them, including Sugu himself and his two other brothers. Third young master? A servant came over. He was ordered by the king to clean up the post-war affairs, but why was the third young master standing here? Sugu withdrew his sight from the slave and waved his hand, indicating the slaves who came to clean up the battlefield to continue. After listening to the slaves who cleaned up the battlefield, he turned and left. 23 slaves, 9 assistant slaves, 14 servant slaves, and 12 people who carried the wooden box and were all dead. 10 of the 15 slaves who were guarding at the door were dead. The slaves who rushed over were either dead or injured. With such injuries, it was estimated that they would die soon. The death toll would eventually exceed 30 or even 40. If there was no detour at that time but directly passed through there, would he also be on the death list? Sugu recalled the words of the Yanjiao tribe's man named Xiao Xian. By chance? Or had he already received the news? The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He could not stand still. Originally, Sugu went to the place where he lived, but now he directly turned and ran toward the palace exit. Wuxia, who was behind him, saw the young master suddenly turn and run. After thinking about it, he continued to follow. Therefore, on that day the slaves of Wuxia city saw the third young master rush into the tribal area in the morning. After he came out with a cold face, they saw him rush in again. Chapter 300. Xiao Xian was in the house, burying his head in writing. He wrote down in detail the set of language used by the slave owners that he had learned during this time. Every time he had his own experience he would also record it. Tuo and Lei were also forced by Xiao Xian to learn these languages. Even if they could not fully learn, it was always good to understand some of them so that they would not be deceived by the slaves and the slave owners. In the slave owner's territory, it would be easier to understand more, and the later actions would be easier. The so-called sharpening the knife would not delay the work of cutting firewood. They now had food on hand, so they were not in a hurry to do other things. First, they had to understand the most basic things. When Sugu came over, Lei and Tuo were dizzy from looking at those complicated words. It was rare for them to take a break with Sugu's arrival. Xiao Xian looked up at Sugu, who rushed in. He stopped writing, rolled up the animal skin roll full of words and put it away. "What's the matter?" Xiao Xian asked as he packed up. Su Gu, who rushed into the house, gasped for breath. He took 2 steps towards Xiao Xian and slapped his palm on the table. I asked you, bang? The table, which was not very sturdy to begin with, could not withstand the force and scattered into sand all over the floor. Seeing Xiao Xian and the other 2 staring at him, Su Gu waved his hand. I'll wait for someone to redo it for you. Looking around, there was no place to sit, so Su Gu simply stood. I have something to ask you. Su Gu looked at Xiao Xian. Are you a witch? Witch. Lei and Tuo were somewhat confused. How could Xiao Xian be a witch? Besides, it was impossible for a witch to come to such a place. No. Xiao Xian said. But you said this morning? The expression on Su Gu's face changed a few times. What happened in the palace was not good to spread. However, thinking that Xiao Xian's hint could actually match up with today's matter, Su Gu took a deep breath. His eager appearance was gone and he calmed down. He stared straight at Xiao Xian and said in a deep voice, Did you already know something? This is our first time here, so we don't know much about this place, Xiao Xian said. Su Gu was silent for a while and did not address this issue again. Whether Xiao Xian already knew about the news or he really had the ability to predict, he really wanted to cooperate with Yanjiao's people now. Moreover, he had no way out. So what if he fought? About the cooperation, what do you think? Su Gu asked. We can work together, but before that, I want to know what benefits we can get, Xiao Xian asked. Su Gu stood up and straightened his back. As a slave owner, he could provide too much, so he still had this confidence. I can let the slaves build you a bigger house, give you passage tokens and provide food and water, Su Gu said. Xiao Xian nodded. These 3 things were really good, but they were not what he wanted most. I want to know something about the other slave owners. Su Gu frowned. Yes. I can give you all the information I know, but you must come up with something worth exchanging. This is natural. So, happy cooperation? Happy cooperation. There was no contract. In the cooperation between the slave owners and the tribes, under normal circumstances, they would not sign a fixed contract, unless it involved some important things or when the 2 sides were very familiar with each other. Only then would they make other plans. After solving the matter that had been on his mind, Su Gu's mood was better. As a reward for Xiao Xian's tip in the morning, after he left the tribal area, he had people send some stones for building houses. These stones were cut and transported from the rocky areas in the desert, with special slaves guarding them. Xiao Xian could not go there at will. Su Gu's actions provided a lot of convenience for Xiao Xian. They only needed to wait in the house for the stones to be transported. Xiao Xian took a fancy to an open space in the tribal area and asked the other tribes. After learning that no one was building a house there, he took Tuo and Lei to build a house together. The slaves sent by Su Gu also helped. 2 days later, another big house was built in the tribal area, which was not worse than the other tribes. The difference was that the other tribes had dozens of people living in each embassy, while Yanjiao's embassy only had 3 people. In order to show his importance and sincerity, Su Gu specially cut a piece of sunset tree to make a wooden sign and hung it at the door of Yanjiao's embassy. He also wrote it with golden paint, but it was moved aside by Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian polished a slate himself and hung it at the door. He engraved the words Yanjiao in the tribal language, and also engraved a totem at the corner of the eyes on the slate. Su Gu's wooden board was in the common language of the slave owners. 2 languages, 2 signs were hung at the door. Xiao Xian's slate was at the front door, while Su Gu's board was a little more to the side. This is called an embassy. Xiao Xian looked at the built house and said. Although such a building was not very gorgeous in Xiao Xian's view, as long as it was similar to the other tribes, there was no need to be too prominent. If more people came in the future, they would have a firm foothold and strong strength, then it would be no harm to expand. For now, it was better not to be too high profile. Before, because there was no place, the 3 people crowded in a broken stone house. Now that there was a new embassy, they were separated. Each person occupied a large room, while the camel was tied in the backyard. Xiao Xian also specially built a shed for it. For the changes in Yanjiao, the other people in the tribal area were clear. This was the cooperation between Yanjiao and the 3rd young master of Luoya City. Really, what were they thinking? It was not good to cooperate with others, but they chose to cooperate with this one. Even if they were looking for the 2 royal sisters, this 3rd young master was a person who did not even have an exclusive slave. He of the Hui tribe also sighed when he talked to people. He told the kid that if he wanted to cooperate, he should look for the other 2 young masters, not this one. Why didn't he listen to his advice? What a pity. Sure enough, it was the first time a young man came here. He was thoughtless, impulsive, and short-sighted. Regardless of what other people thought, Xiao Xian and the other two were still quite satisfied with this cooperation. The day after the house was built, Su Gu came again to find Xiao Xian. This time, the two only met alone in Xiao Xian's room. Lei and Tuo were not there, and Su Gu did not bring Wuxia. Here, you want the pass token. Su Gu handed the token to Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian took the token, which was made of sunset trees. On it was written Yin Jiao in the words used by the slave owners, and on the other side was the symbol of Luoya City. Putting away the pass token, Xiao Xian looked at Su Gu. The third young master looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. He seemed to be entangled with something. What's the matter? Say it. Xiao Xian said. Su Gu irritably scratched his head. These days, in addition to helping Xiao Xian get the pass token, he also specifically asked people about the tribal shaman. The more he thought about it, the more complicated his heart became. After a long time, Su Gu squeezed out a sentence. Are you really not a shaman? No, if you know about the tribe, you know that the tribe's shaman will not come out easily. Xiao Xian said. Are you the heir of the shaman? Su Gu asked again. No. Xiao Xian affirmed. If you are not, then how did you predict water? Su Gu was not reconciled. Being able to predict does not necessarily mean being a shaman. Su Gu heard this and sat on the stone bench looking disheartened. Xiao Xian thought for a moment and asked, In your city there is no shaman? Many cities have no shaman. Su Gu said, As far as I know, there are no more than 3 cities with shamans. And there are more than 20 cities in the desert. For the slave owners, a shaman was not necessary. A city only needed one master. The power of your tribe comes from the fire seed, and our power exists in our blood. Su Gu held out his hand. Xiao Xian saw that on Su Gu's hand, there was a blue flame gradually emerging. What surprised Xiao Xian even more was that when Su Gu made these blue flames in his mind inside the eggshell, a flame suddenly appeared at the edge. It was not big, but it was very obvious. Seeing this flame at first sight, Xiao Xian's heart jumped to 2 words, fire seed. However, this was somewhat different from the tribe's fire seed. Xiao Xian suddenly thought that the slave owners did not need a fire seed. Was it because the power of the fire seed did not exist in the outside world but in their bodies? In his mind, inside the eggshell, the flame suddenly appeared. The red flame and the blue flame intertwined, seeming somewhat chaotic. Su Gu looked at the blue flame on his hand and said, A successful slave owner must have the ability to enslave people. This kind of slavery does not refer to the ordinary slave, but to turn an unrelated person into a slave that belongs to oneself. The stronger this ability to enslave people, the more slaves the slave owner can have. As the king of a city, the slave owner's ability to enslave people was the highest, and there were many slaves under his hands. Of course, other slave owners, even if they could enslave more slaves, could not cross the king of a city, or they would be regarded as having ulterior motives. In addition to the slave owners, other slave owners could more or less have some of their own slaves. However, in Luoya City, Su Gu was the only slave owner who had not been able to have his own slaves so far. He was a failure in the eyes of the slave owners, a waste. Su Gu did not say how they enslave people, but Xiao Xian speculated based on Su Gu's words that the slave owner's ability to enslave people seemed to be similar to their engraved ferocious beasts, but more overbearing. The blue flame on Su Gu's hand also made Xiao Xian think of the time when he used the engraving secret technique to engrave Caesar. Su Gu had been staring at the blue flame on his hand. He did not know what he was thinking of, but he was lost in thought. Xiao Xian was also studying the flame that appeared in the eggshell in his mind. The red and blue interlaced flame, compared to before, had a weaker sense of disorder. The separated and scattered blue flame was slowly gathering. Oh, forget it. You don't understand. You tribesmen don't have to worry about this at all. Su Gu put away the flame on his hand, and in Xiao Xian's mind, the strange flame gradually disappeared. With regret, Su Gu left the tribal area and returned to the palace. After the meal, he closed himself in the room and began the daily necessary enslavement practice. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Su Gu felt that when he used his enslavement ability today, it was a lot smoother. Although it still did not reach the standard of enslavement, compared to yesterday there was progress. Chapter 301. As a waste in people's eyes, Su Gu had not given up. He was clear about his situation and analyzed the possible results if he continued to fail like this. Some people advised him to show weakness now and then show goodwill to his two brothers. However, Sugu was clear about the temperament of his two brothers. No matter who became the king of Wuxia city in the end, even if Sugu's life was kept, Sugu would not live well. Instead of that, it was better to fight. A slave owner without ambition was not a good slave owner. Because of this decision, Sugu would practice in his room every day when others did not know. However, failure again and again made Sugu's confidence less and less. The number of times he tried was too many. Sugu was very clear about every change in himself. After feeling the difference today when he practiced enslavement again, he carefully observed it. Then he was pleasantly surprised to find that the enslavement power was much smoother than usual and not as strenuous as before. Why did such a change happen? After the surprise, Sugu began to carefully analyze it. He had also thought that it was the result of his daily practice, but he had never seen such an obvious change even when he had been practicing so diligently. These few days, due to various things, he had less time to practice than usual, but the result was incomparably shocking. What? Why in the world? Sugu took out the things he did in the past 2 days and analyzed it bit by bit. The movement of his fingers suddenly stopped. His pupils shrank as he thought of a possibility. Xiaoxian and Yanjiao. The person who had a witch-like prediction ability. Yes, it seemed that it was at that time that the change happened. Before, because of his heavy thoughts, he did not pay attention. Now that he thought about it, at that time, there was indeed a strange feeling. It was as if a ladle of muddy water mixed with sand was filtered by a densely woven linen cloth. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was so. Sugu walked back and forth in the room, jumping, clenching his fists and raising them. He took a few deep breaths to calm down his excited mood. In order to be sure, Sugu ran to the Wanderer area again that day. In the evening, Xiaoxian looked at the energetic and high-spirited third young master, practicing the enslavement method in front of him. Since there was not enough firewood here, it was inconvenient to start a fire. Xiaoxian took out a water moonstone to light up the place. Looking at the little slave owner who was practicing, Xiaoxian did not chase him away. Instead, he observed the changes in the flame in his mind again. He guessed that because of the eggshell in his mind, Sugu had some favorable changes. Sugu wanted to gain benefits from this place, while Xiaoxian himself also wanted to study the source of the slave owner's power. Sugu was just the right experimental subject. Amidst the intertwining red and blue flames, the sense of chaos became weaker and weaker. The blue and red flames converged and became distinct. When Sugu used the enslavement method, the blue flame that appeared on his hand became more and more stable. It was not like before where it seemed to be blown away by the wind. Ray, who lived in the opposite room, looked at the moon outside the window and then looked at the light coming from Xiaoxian's room. He thought to himself, why is the third young master here instead of sleeping so late at night? Was there something wrong with his brain? Sugu stayed with Xiaoxian until dawn the next day. In the morning, the tribesmen who got up early talked about the cooperation between the 3 Yinjiao people and the waste of the third young master. As they were talking, they saw the Yinjiao side's door open, and the Wuxia city's third young master, who they were just talking about, walked out quickly with a straight face, as if something had made him very angry. After Sugu left, the tribesmen who gathered together to chat were in disbelief. That was Sugu? The Wuxia city's third young master? It seems so. What seems so? That's Sugu. How could Sugu come out from Yinjiao? Could it be that he came here before dawn? I heard that Sugu came last night. He didn't leave until now. Even if the tribesmen cooperated with the slave owners, there had never been a slave owner who stayed overnight in the tribe's place. Seeing this, they couldn't help but think. Looking at Sugu's face, did he quarrel with the Yinjiao people? It's estimated that they didn't reach an agreement. It's very likely. In their view, whether it was Sugu or the 3 Yinjiao people, they were unreliable. It was certain that they would get together to quarrel. On the other side, Sugu tried to maintain a tight face, not letting people see the excitement in his heart. He held back his laughter until the blue veins came out, and his face looked a bit scary. It was not that he didn't want to laugh. If he came out of Yinjiao with a happy face, people would certainly guess what benefits he got from Yinjiao. Xiaoxian's ability could not be known to others. If it was known by his 2 brothers, it was estimated that they would dig him out from here. Sugu had never been so fortunate to cooperate with Yinjiao. At first, when Sugu decided to cooperate with the Yinjiao people, his heart didn't take them too seriously. Even if it was not a Yinjiao tribe, as long as it was a tribe, he would treat it with the same attitude. But now, Sugu's view of the Yinjiao people had completely changed. Whether it was Xiao Xian's words or his own changes, he must pay attention to them. This transaction was really worth it. Thinking of Xiao Xian's request, Su Gu also began to prepare. The Yanjiao people wanted to know more about the slave owners, so he had to quickly prepare these. Otherwise, this ally would be gone. Returning to the palace from the tribal area, Su Gu saw that the slaves were moving out a lot of sharp-bottomed pottery filled with fruit wine from the wine cellar. Today there was fruit wine to drink. Su Gu's mood was better and he couldn't help but smile. Now he finally laughed. Well, when the time came he could have someone send a jar to Yanjiao. He was in a good mood. Even to the slaves, Su Gu rarely showed a smile. When the slaves holding the wine jars saw Su Gu's smile, they almost shook and dropped the wine jars. This was the third young master? The third young master could smile so kindly and not hypocritically? Was he still not awake? Su Gu did not look at the wine slave who was there, and went straight to his residence. When he passed through the pool in the palace he was in a good mood to stop and enjoy it. In the desert, it was extravagant to build such a pool for growing flowers and raising turtles. Only the king's palace could have such a view. Su Gu did not know the flowers that grew in the water. He saw a turtle crawling out of the water lying on the edge of the pool, half of its body exposed outside. The turtles in the pool were brought back from other places by Su Gu's father. He thought that they could not be raised. Who knew that a lot of them survived but they were not active. Every day they were listless. Poking them with a straw pole they rarely responded. The color of their bodies also became lighter. He didn't know what was going on. Where there were flowers and pools, the air seemed particularly fresh and moist. Su Gu sat on the edge of the pool looking at the turtle. He quickly poked it with his finger but the turtle did not move. He poked again. It still did not move. Su Gu did not care about it. Looking around he saw that a group of patrolling slaves had just passed by and left. There was no one else around. Su Gu thought of the results of his night. He could not help but reach out and mobilize the power in his body. Soon, a blue flame appeared in his palm. The flame was so stable that its shape could be seen clearly. Feeling the smooth feeling of this process, Su Gu's mood was refreshed like cold water on a hot day. Perhaps, it would not be long before he could enslave people and get a real slave that belonged to him. Looking at the flame in his palm, Su Gu's eyes caught a glimpse of the turtle that was slowly moving. Like a ghost he stretched his hand over there. The moment he touched the turtle's back, the blue flame followed Su Gu's palm and spread to the turtle's body. With the spread of the flame, black stripes appeared on the turtle's back. Su Gu felt a force passing along his arm to the turtle. After a few breaths, Su Gu felt the energy in his body stabilize again, and the flame in his palm disappeared. A sense of exhaustion hit him. Su Gu rubbed his forehead, feeling something. His eyes stared at the turtle lying on the edge of the pool. The expression on his face changed from disbelief to confusion to surprise and then to anger. The rapid change of expression made the muscles on his face twitch. His enslavement was successful. This was worth celebrating, worth being happy. But Su Gu really did not want to be the first slave owner in history to enslave a turtle for the first time. Chapter 302. After confirming that he had enslaved a turtle, Su Gu's mood could be described as quite complicated. A team of patrolling slaves passed by, and Su Gu quickly threw the newly enslaved turtle back into the water. He really didn't want people to know that he had enslaved such an animal for the first time. If it was known by the other two brothers, they would take this matter out and make it known to everyone. He himself would also become a joke despised by the other slave owners. However, in general it was better to be able to successfully enslave than not being able to enslave. After leaving the pool, Su Gu quickly returned to his residence. He did not bother to rest and continued to train his enslavement ability. When he was training alone he would not use people to experiment. One reason was that he knew that his strength was not enough to enslave a person. The other was that he was afraid of being known after repeated failures. After practicing alone for a while, Su Gu felt that it was boring. He had people send over a live scorpion, and then secretly enslaved it again. This time he failed. The scorpion also died. Although the scorpion did not seem to have any wounds or other abnormal conditions, it was the same as people. If a slave owner failed to enslave a slave, the enslaved slave would most likely die. After the failure, although Su Gu was disappointed, he quickly cheered up. After all, he had succeeded. After a day of rest, Su Gu once again came to the pool where his father raised the turtle. There were 5 turtles lying on the edge of the pool. They all looked the same. If it was before, Su Gu would not be able to recognize these. However, at this moment, he had a feeling that these 5 turtles were not the one he had successfully enslaved yesterday. After waiting for a while, Sugu saw a black turtle crawling out of the water. This turtle was bigger than the others and its color was darker. When this turtle crawled out, the 5 turtles that had been lying on the edge of the pool retreated, making a place as if they were very afraid. Was this one? Sugu leaned forward and carefully observed the turtle that he had successfully enslaved yesterday. He knew that slaves who were successfully enslaved would be stronger than other ordinary people. He did not expect that it could be used on animals. In just one day it was already so obvious. He really was not a waste. Sugu put aside the embarrassment of enslaving a turtle yesterday and was now quite complacent. This turtle was not only big but also full of spirit. Moreover, because it was successfully enslaved by Sugu, this turtle did not open its mouth to bite when Sugu picked it up. It was very obedient. After the excitement just now, Sugu calmed down. He would not let others know about his changes, and he could not let his 2 elder brothers know that he had successfully enslaved others. He had to wait until he had enough power in his hands to make it public. He was too far behind his 2 elder brothers, and now he had to keep a low profile. Thinking of the turtle's changes, Sugu could not let it stay here all the time. Otherwise, in another 2 or 3 days it would grow bigger. If it was too obvious, it would be found abnormal. After thinking about it, Sugu ran to his father's side to beg, saying that he wanted to bring a turtle back to eat. The Luoye king only reprimanded him a little before agreeing. Sugu used the animal skin bag to bring the turtle back to the place where he lived. There was no place to raise it. Finally, Sugu directly put it in the pot, and then took the pot to the tribal area to find Xiao Xian and the others. "I'll invite you to eat." Sugu put the pot on the stone table and said. Smelling the smell of the broth, Lei and Tua could not help but fill 2 bowls. Seeing that Sugu had something to discuss with Xiao Xian, they took the bowls out. Xiao Xian smelled the smell from the pot and asked, "What is this cooking?" There was no one else, so Sugu did not hide it. He proudly said, "My slave, Xiao Xian." People. Looking at the pot of soup, Xiao Xian suddenly lost his appetite. After thinking for a while, he used a spoon to scoop some of the soup and observed the bones and meat he scooped out. After recognizing them, he was relieved. "This is a turtle?" Xiao Xian looked at Sugu. "Yes." Sugu talked about his experience of enslaving a turtle. Being able to successfully enslave it was also thanks to Xiao Xian's blessing. Because of the cooperation between the 2 people, Sugu also hoped to reveal some information to Xiao Xian. He wanted to tell Xiao Xian that he still had potential for development and was not a useless waste so that the Yinjiao people could be assured to cooperate with him. At the same time, he also asked Xiao Xian not to spread this matter out, even if it was Lei and Tua. Xiao Xian was just a little surprised, but he didn't think it was shocking. After all, their tribe used the secret engraving technique to engrave beasts, so the slave owner's matter wasn't a big deal. "I believe that it won't be long before I can have my own slaves." After a pause, Sugu added, "Human slaves. About the slave owners in other cities, I'm sorting it out. After sorting it out, I'll take it out for you in 2 days. Sugu said. "You can." Xiao Xian waited for Sugu's next words. 10 days later, I will go out of the city. I hope you can accompany me." Sugu said. "What are you going out of the city for?" Xiao Xian asked. "I'm going to the oasis to find something. I'll tell you then. Don't tell others about this," Sugu urged. He nodded in agreement. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian said to Sugu, "Third turtle, you go out for a while. Call me third young master." Sugu was quite dissatisfied with the word turtle. He originally wanted to say something, but when he thought of Xiao Xian's words, Sugu's eyes lit up. "Are you going to use witchcraft?" "I'm not a witch," Xiao Xian said. I know. Sugu waved his hand. His words were like that, but the expression on his face seemed to say, "Don't hide it, I know you are." After Sugu left, Xiao Xian found a thick hollow hay, which he specifically picked out when he was looking for food for the camel. He kept it as a spare. To go out of the city, he wanted to predict the weather. At first, he could only predict the weather in the last 1 or 2 days, but now he could predict the weather 10 days later by nodding divination, and the divination was not as difficult as it was in the early days. Although more complicated things were still impossible to predict, compared to before, it was indeed a great improvement. After a while. After the knot was finished, Xiao Xian looked at the knot in his hand, read the conclusion above, and then rolled the knot into a ball and threw it out of the window. Not far from Xiao Xian's room, the camel's shed was there. The grass ball that Xiao Xian threw hit the camel's head. The camel that was hit stared blankly, then found the grass ball on the ground. It crooked its mouth, picked up the grass ball and ate it. This was a very good way to destroy the knot. When Su Gu went in again, he was told by Xiao Xian, 6 days later there will be a sandstorm. You should prepare yourself. Don't run around on that day. It's best to stay in the palace. With the last experience, Su Gu believed in Xiao Xian's words. The sudden sandstorm in the desert could make this part of Luoya City, including all the surrounding areas, invisible. The visibility instantly dropped to 0. At the same time, there were some ferocious beasts in the desert mixed in the sandstorm, specifically using such weather to slaughter and prey. Every time there was a sandstorm, Luoya City would strengthen its defense, and the slave owners would hide well. Chapter 303. After Su Gu went back, he had people send some unslaughtered food to his residence every day. To the outside world he would personally slaughter and cook it, but in fact he was secretly training the method of enslavement. Practicing again and again, there were successes and failures. As time passed, the success rate of Su Gu's enslavement became higher and higher. Su Gu fulfilled his promise and wrote some preliminary information about the slave owners on the cloth for Xiao Xian to see. Xiao Xian transcribed those on the animal skin roll, while also having a preliminary understanding of several major cities in the desert and the major slave owners in each city. On the 6th day of Xiao Xian's prediction, a sandstorm came. Before this there were no signs at all. Su Gu stood on the high platform of the palace, looking at the turbid sandstorm in the distance that was quickly approaching. His heart was even more afraid of the tribal shaman. It was always easy to be afraid of the unknown and ununderstood things. In particular, such a profession was extremely rare in the city of many slave owners. The sandstorm swept the entire city in an instant. In the sandstorm, large particles of sand were close to the surface, washing everything near the ground. People standing in the sandstorm would suffer a needle-like attack. Even some creatures covered with scales were unwilling to bear such pain. They would try their best to drill under the sand to avoid the attack of the surface sand. The lighter dust was rolled higher by the wind, covering the sky and the sun. The Yanjiao trio, who had long been prepared, stayed in the house, closed the doors and windows and listened to the sound outside. Outside the house, the camel Mud stood in the wind in the sandstorm, a tuft of hair on its head flying with the wind. They were a species that had long adapted to life in the desert. Even in this kind of sandstorm they were not scared. Some of them could even walk freely in such a sandstorm. When they heard the roar of the beasts outside, Xiao Xian's trio rushed out with their equipment. Some of the beasts in the sandstorm had crossed the outer city wall and broke through the outer defense into the city. The people from the other tribes did not come out unless they saw the sandstorm beasts rushing to their doorsteps. However, the 3 from Yanjiao were different. They had been holding it in for the past few days, and it was rare for them to find something to vent their frustrations. For people who had been used to hunting since childhood, their hands were itchy after not hunting for so long. They felt like their bones were rusty after not moving for 3 days. Were the beasts in the sandstorm dangerous? Danger. But the Yanjiao people weren't afraid. They had encountered more dangerous beasts before. Encountering such a situation only made them happy. Moreover, after killing those sandstorm beasts they could be eaten as food. Even if there wasn't much meat they could still make bone soup. If other people knew what the 3 Yanjiao men were thinking, they would think that the Yanjiao men were crazy. Xiao Xian and the other 2 didn't fight the sandstorm beasts recklessly. They cooperated with each other to deal with the beasts, just like how they cooperated to hunt in the forest. Low visibility? It was fine as long as his hearing was normal. He could still make out the sounds of the sandstorm beasts moving about in the sandstorm. Cha-Cha, who had finally moved here, also caught some as rations. When the sandstorm was over and everything was calm again, the people around saw that near the Yanjiao's embassy, there were sandstorm beasts with their stomachs cut open and about to dry out. The slaves and slave owners of Luoya City changed their view of the 3 Yanjiao men again. They were fierce and had a big appetite. On the 10th day, Luoya City was restored to its former appearance. The people of the tribes were doing their own things, coming and going in a hurry. Xiao Xian knew that these tribes had something to hide from the Yanjiao, but it didn't matter. He would figure out what these people were hiding. On the day that Xiao Xian and Su Gu agreed on, Xiao Xian and the other 2 were ready to go. This time they didn't intend to take the camel. Su Gu sent someone to take care of the camel while Xiao Xian left with Cha-Cha. After holding back for so long, Cha-Cha should go outside to relax, although there was a vast desert outside. In these 10 days, Su Gu's enslavement ability was getting stronger and stronger. He felt that he could almost enslave slaves. However, before he had enough assurance, he would not enslave slaves in the city for the time being. After half a year, Sugu went out of the city again. This time he only took Wuxia plus Xiao Xian and the other two, a total of 5 people. The oasis that Sugu said belonged to his father, the king of Luoya city. It was said that it was robbed from other slave owners a long time ago. Until now, there were some people who wanted to rob the oasis, but they were all beaten back. Resources were all robbed and then defended by strength. When there was no strength, they could not defend it and they had to change people. From Luoya city to the oasis, it took about 2 days to walk. If they traveled light and walked fast, they could arrive in 1 day. This time they did not bring much luggage. Xiao Xian and the other strength was also there. They did not find it too difficult to hurry through the desert. They only needed to guard against the beasts that appeared in the desert. They did not know if it was because the sandstorm had just passed, but the desert was still calm. What they saw were sand dunes that stretched like waves. As far as the eye could see, there seemed to be no signs of life. After leaving the city, Sugu told Xiao Xian the purpose of this trip. Although Sugu told the other people in the city that he wanted to go to the oasis to relax and let the 3 people from Yinjiao be his bodyguards, in fact he just wanted to find something, a beautiful stone, as a birthday gift from Sugu to his father. Luoya City King Su Luan's birthday was coming soon. Sugu decided that this time, he would brush his presents in front of his father so that he could ask for more resources. There were many slaves in the city who had not yet recognized their masters. They were all prepared by the Luoya City King to reward other slave owners. Because Sugu did not have the ability to enslave, the Luoya City King did not send him any unrecognized slaves. This time, Sugu decided to seize the opportunity to pick one. Slaves also had advantages and disadvantages. A stone? What kind of stone? Xiao Xian was curious. What kind of stone would it be that Sugu was so concerned about it, and even sent it as a birthday gift for the Luoya City King? Sugu's eyes were full of yearning. He had found the stone before, but at that time he was not strong enough and did not intend to take it out. Now, in order to seize the opportunity, he decided to find the hidden stone again. It's so beautiful that it's unbelievable. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. Sugu's eyes looked into the distance, as if recalling the intoxicated feeling when he first saw the stone. Before arriving at the oasis, under Sugu's strong request, Xiao Xian signed a treaty with him, swearing by the Yinjiao totem that he would not covet the stone. Of course, Xiao Xian also got a lot of benefits from Sugu. For the people of Yinjiao, even if it was the jade of the Mang tribe, the attraction was limited. In Lei and Tuo's mind, the stone was best used as a weapon. It was purely for ornamental purposes. What was the use? Could it hunt? Therefore, for what Sugu said, Lei and Tuo did not care at all. Xiao Xian was even more curious. What did the stone look like that it could make this knowledgeable slave owner, who had enjoyed a luxurious life since childhood, so fascinated? Finally, when they were about to reach their destination, Sugu stopped. Xiao Xian looked around. There were no mountains here, only tall sand dunes. The water of the oasis in the distance seemed to come from the ground. The place where Sugu hid the stone was not in the oasis, but in a place outside the oasis. Looking at the high sand dunes and the surroundings, Sugu judged the position and then rushed to somewhere between 2 high sand dunes, where he began to dig. Xiao Xian's 3 people and Wuxia also came to help. Too much time had passed and there were some changes here. It was quite difficult to dig things out. Fortunately, Sugu's memory was good, and he also roughly judged the place where he buried the stone. After digging for a long time, they finally dug a wooden box buried in the ground. All of you turn around and look around. Sugu panted, his eyes showing his vigilance. I can't take a look? Xiao Xian asked. Sugu tangled for a moment, but then he remembered that Xiao Xian had signed a treaty with him. He also swore by the tribe's valued totem. Then he thought about the help Xiao Xian gave him. Sugu was silent. This was the tacit agreement that Xiao Xian could take a look. Sugu carefully took the box on the ground out of the sand, gently brushed away the sand outside the wooden box, and then opened the wooden box. Inside was something wrapped in linen. Including the piece of linen that was wrapped, it was only the size of a fist. The stone inside was even smaller. After taking out the thing inside, Sugu's eyes seemed to only have the dazzling thing under Yangguang. Seeing the thing in Sugu's hand, Xiao Xian's eyelids jumped. He really did not expect to see it here. For a long time in the past, Xiao Xian thought that he would not see it in this world. But now, it appeared in front of Xiao Xian's eyes. Looking at Sugu, who was already intoxicated, Xiao Xian wanted to say, Turtle 3 that is not a stone but gold. Chapter 304. The piece of gold in his hand was square, shining under Yang Guang's light. Even if it had been put aside for so long, there were no other colors. Xiao Xian was not greedy for the appearance of the gold, but more curious. He actually wanted to take the gold to see, but seeing Sugu so tightly and so excited, he gave up the idea for the time being and waited for his mood to stabilize. Third young master, Sugu Turtle-san, have you seen enough? If you've seen enough, let's continue. Xiao Xian urged. Close to the oasis, Xiao Xian was thirsty. Instead of admiring the gold under the sun, he would rather go to the oasis to find a shady place to drink some water and rest. Pulled back by Xiao Xian's words, Sugu found himself staring at the stone in his hand, lost in thought. He quickly wrapped the gold in his hand and put it in an inner pocket. The clothes he wore today had a secret pocket sewn for storing things. After putting it in, Sugu got up and walked 2 steps, feeling that something was wrong. He looked sideways at Xiao Xian, his eyes looking up and down, carefully observing the expression on Xiao Xian's face, not letting go of any details. But in the end, what made Sugu helpless was that he really did not see any greed or intoxication on Xiao Xian's face. It seemed that what Xiao Xian just saw was just an ordinary stone, not a treasure. Don't you think that stone is addictive? Sugu could not help but ask. Xiao Xian shook his head. I don't think so. How is that possible? Sugu looked at Xiao Xian again, still coming to the same conclusion. There was someone who could resist its charm. This time Sugu was surprised, but at the same time he had some doubts. Could it be that only he thought that the stone was so beautiful that it was addictive? If that was the case, what if he gave it to his father as a gift and he did not like it? Xiao Xian's reaction made Sugu's previously firm plan become hesitant. In the end, was he too addicted, or did Xiao Xian have no eyesight? When you saw it, didn't you have a special feeling? Sugu asked. A special feeling? Xiao Xian thought for a moment. He was just surprised, that was all. Seeing Xiao Xian's expression, Sugu didn't give up. Don't you feel that this stone has a strange feeling, like standing in the royal city and looking down? I've never been to your palace, Xiao Xian said. At the same time, he also speculated Sugu's feelings from Sugu's words. When he saw that piece of gold, Sugu seemed to see power and wealth. Seeing the gold for the first time, Sugu unexpectedly had such an awareness. Sure enough, he was the young master of a city. If it was shown to Lei and Tua, they would probably be more confused than Xiao Xian, thinking that this stone was not as important as a piece of meat. Do you think that if I give this stone to the Luoya city king, he will like it? Sugu asked. I think he'll like it. As the king of a city, he naturally had absolute ambition. His pursuit of power and wealth was more than others. Even if it was the first time he saw the gold, as long as the Luoya city king Su Luan's preferences were similar to Sugu's, he would certainly like this stone that reflected the golden light. Sugu wanted to take it out and show it to the other 3 people to see how they would react, but after thinking about it, he decided to wait until they went back. Continuing to walk forward, they could see some sporadic grass, which was very conspicuous on this piece of sand. After seeing a lot of yellow sand, a bunch of green grass could make people feel infinite vitality. The more they went forward, the more grass was distributed on the ground. There were also some trees that Xiao Xian could not name. 10 camels were tied to the trunks, eating the grass. Not far away, some slaves with weapons walked back and forth, vigilantly staring at the desert in the distance to prevent abnormal situations. Xiao Xian and the other 2 followed Sugu and Wuxia to the oasis. A group of slaves stopped them, and after Sugu's explanation, Xiao Xian and the other 2 were able to really enter. The oasis was not too big, but the defense force stationed in this oasis was about 1,000 slaves. For this place, it could be said to be heavily guarded. After entering the oasis, Xiao Xian found that there was a group of special slaves. There were about 10 of them, and the cloth of each slave was much better than the other slaves. The other slaves were wearing cloth, but most of the time it was tattered. But these 10 people, even if the cloth on their bodies had sand and stains, it looked very neat, without a hole. There were also patterns on the cloth of the clothes. In particular, the leader's clothes were neat. If Sugu had not said that those were slaves, Xiao Xian might have really mistaken that slave for a slave owner. Those are the people around my father, Sugu explained. Usually there are not so many people in the oasis. Probably because something happened here some time ago, so they sent people over. Seeing Sugu, the man respectfully saluted. His eyes swept over Xiao Xian and the other 2. He seemed calm, but when those eyes swept over, it was as if they were brushed by a thorny knife. Xiao Xian felt that the other party was very defensive against the three of them, and did not have a good impression. Third young master, are they from the Yanjiao tribe? The slave named Ai Shi asked. Yes, the three of them are people who cooperate with me. They came here with me, Su Gu said. Xiao Xian found that when Su Gu talked to Ai Shi, his tone was much better. Compared to Wu Shi, who followed Su Gu, his attitude was very different. Also, one followed the king and the other followed the young master. Naturally, their status was different. That's it. I hope the three of you can stay away from the spring, Ai Shi said. His tone was also stiff, as if there was no room for maneuver. Why? Su Gu asked. Although he knew that the others had to stay away from the spring area, Ai Shi's words made him feel strange. Was there something that he didn't know about? Ai Shi did not answer. He just stared at Xiao Xian and the other two with caution. All right, let's go to the house over there to rest. Xiao Xian did not wait here. He decisively took Lei and Tua to a place for people to rest. It was also the place that Su Gu pointed out to them. After waiting for a while in the sand house, Xiao Xian waited for the angry Su Gu. He thought that Su Gu and the slave's conversation was not pleasant. How is it? Xiao Xian asked. No, nothing. Su Gu stuttered. Third young master, I think we are now in a cooperative relationship, but there are some things that I still hope you can tell us, Xiao Xian said. Well, naturally, I know this. Su Gu nodded. Then, third young master, I would like to ask, why is the slave so guarded against us? Su Gu was ready to answer, but Xiao Xian raised his hand to stop him. Don't say that he is also like this to other tribes. Just now, his eyes told me that he is just extra guarded against us Yanjiao people. When the slave called Ai Shi asked, the words Yanjiao were emphasized. Obviously, there was something about the Yanjiao tribe, but Xiao Xian and the other two did not know. Su Gu thought about it and let Wu Shi go out to guard the door. Then he said to Xiao Xian, some time ago, someone was hiding in the water delivery team from the spring to the city, causing some trouble. Su Gu did not say it in detail, but Xiao Xian could still roughly guess. Does the slave think that the assassin is related to us? Su Gu nodded. But only 3 of us from the Yanjiao tribe came. This is known to the other tribes. Xiao Xian said. I didn't say it was you. If it was really determined that you were involved, you would have been surrounded by slaves. Su Gu explained. Then why? Xiao Xian asked. Because of a person related to your Yanjiao tribe. Although according to your tribe standards he is no longer a Yanjiao person, but in the eyes of the slave owners and slaves he is still related. Who is that person? Xiao Xian asked. Dayu. Chapter 305. Dao Yu. This was a name that Xiao Xian had not heard for a long time, but he had always remembered it deeply. This was one of the few people on the Yanjiao tribe's must-kill list. Originally, he used his people to betray and murder Yanji and other Yanjiao wanderers, and then fled without a trace. After the Yanjiao tribe returned to the old haunt, the chief and the shaman sent people out several times. They had secretly told several leaders that if they met Dao Yu, they would kill him without mercy. However, Dao Yu seemed to have disappeared. Some people even speculated that the traitor had died. After all, he was just a wanderer. Xiao Xian did not expect to hear this name again now. Dao Yu is here? Xiao Xian's face was serious. Next to him, Lei and Tua also heard about Dao Yu. They remembered the chief and the shaman's instructions and resolutely executed it. When they heard this, they also put away other thoughts and wanted to cut the traitor on the spot. Seeing the reaction of Xiao Xian and the other two, Su Gu's heart was clear. In order to prevent misunderstandings, he quickly denied, "No, we don't have any tribal expellees in Luoya City. Many tribal traders, after being expelled from the tribe, will seek refuge with our slave owners. There used to be some in Luoya City, but after father cooperated with the tribes, those people were handed over to the tribes as a gift to the tribes." Looking at Xiao Xian's face, Su Gu continued, "However, while Luoya City is like this, the other cities are not. There are constantly people abandoned by the tribes who enter the desert city and become high-level slaves under the slave owners. Although every time the tribe's team comes to the desert, they will look for those expellees and hunt them down. However, the results are minimal. After all, the desert is the territory of our slave owners." Su Gu's words were meant to tell the 3 people in Yanjiao to calm down and not be impulsive. If they really wanted to chase them down, the traitor would not be killed, but they themselves would be cut down. Dao Yu is not an expelled totem warrior. He is a wanderer, Xiao Xian said. However, Su Gu's face was still blank. He couldn't tell the difference between expellees and wanderers. He no longer elaborated but asked, "Where is Dao Yu now?" "I didn't know before but I just asked AI sure. He said that he saw Dao Yu in the Beast City last year." Sugu said. In the past he only thought about how to avoid the trap his two brothers had dug, how to survive, and how to improve his ability to enslave. He didn't pay attention to other things. Now that he was cooperating with Yanjiao and involved Yanjiao, he naturally paid more attention to the details. Beast City? Xiao Xian heard of it for the first time. He only knew that there were several cities ruled by slave owners in the desert. However, in the information that Sugu gave him before, there was no such name as Beast City. It's not a city ruled by a slave owner, but a place where the slave owners play every year. Sugu explained to the three Yanjiao people. Beast City was deep in the desert. It was a place built by the three largest slave owners in the desert for leisure time. Later they felt that there were only three parties, so they called the slave owners of other cities in the desert to come over and have fun together. Beast City, as the name implied, was a place for fighting beasts. Many slave owners would bring their own domesticated beasts to fight in the Beast City with the other slave owners' domesticated beasts. Dao Yu represented Baishur City in the Beast City and defeated one of his father's ferocious beasts. Sugu said. "Wait, in the Beast City why would Dao Yu play?" Xiao Xian asked. "Dao Yu is the other side's beast." Sugu's face took it for granted. There are many slaves who, in order to please the slave owners and prove their value, will take the initiative to play. If they win, they can get more benefits from the slave owners, such as removing a layer of shackles. When the slave masters first enslaved the slaves, although they gave them another ability, they also put shackles on them, locking their way to a higher place. If they wanted to improve, they had to let the enslaved slave owners unlock them. Removing a layer of shackles meant that the slave had the opportunity to improve. Of course, even for slaves there were different qualifications. The slave owners were like kindling, giving the slaves a talent. To what extent they could exert this talent, it could only depend on themselves. Sugu's words gave a lot of information which Xiao Xian remembered in his heart. As for Dao Yu, from a wanderer who did not have much power, he could cheat the tribe's materials. After becoming a slave, he could safely climb to a higher position and gain greater ability. Obviously he was not a simple character. Even though there may be a reason for the Yanjiao wanderer's talent, at the same time, it could be seen that Dao Yu was cunning, vicious, and had a heart. At the beginning he did not hesitate to cheat Yanji and the others who helped him until they had nothing, so they knew his character. However, for such a person to become a slave, would he really be single-minded? I heard that many people want Yanjiao people as slaves. However, the number of Yanjiao people who become slaves is not many. Sugu said. Not many means that in addition to Dao Yu, there are other Yanjiao descendants who choose to be slaves? Xiao Xian frowned. It seems so. Sugu was not sure. He had not seen it with his own eyes, just heard about it. Seeing the ugly faces of Xiao Xian and the other two, Sugu originally wanted to say that he also wanted to be a Yanjiao slave, but he did not say it. The tribe's people seemed to be very repulsive to slaves. Well, it was better not to mention it. Those traitors. Shame. Lei was very angry at the Yanjiao people who became slaves, especially Dao Yu. Not only did he murder the tribe, but he also became a slave. Seeing that Lei could not wait to immediately cut him with a knife, Tua quickly pulled him back. Although his heart was angry, Tua understood the situation of the three people. According to Sugu's words, Dao Yu seemed to be a Baishur person, and among the slaves there, his status was not low. If the three of them rashly went there, they really would not get a good result. Baishur's relationship with us is not good. AI sure suspected that the things that happened in the city some time ago were done by Baishur, and also suspected Dao Yu. So when he heard about the Yanjiao people, he was somewhat on guard. Sugu explained. Yes. Xiao Xian nodded. This could be understood, but Dao Yu, this person, was too big a threat. He could not hesitate to kill Yanjiao people, and outside he always made Yanjiao hate him. Such a person, it was better to get rid of him as soon as possible. As he spoke, Xiao Xian heard the cry of an eagle outside. There's a situation. Xiao Xian ran out and looked at the sky. What's the matter? Sugu saw the three Yanjiao people looking dignified and his heart was uneasy. Not far away, Ai Shur, who was guarding the oasis spring and supervising the water delivery, also came over. Young master, what happened? Sugu did not answer but looked at Xiao Xian. He himself did not know what happened. Xiao Xian looked at the eagle in the sky and raised his finger to one side. There's a situation in that direction. Ai Shur looked at the eagle in the sky, paused, and quickly went to call the other slaves to be on guard. Could it be that they were robbing the oasis? AI sure thought. It was no wonder that AI sure was so suspicious. Although this oasis was not big, oases were precious enough in the desert. Many of the wars and contradictions between cities were because of oases. Jia dash, the eagle in the sky cried again, which was another reminder. They're coming, Xiao Xian said. Everyone looked at the sand dunes in the distance. On the rolling sand dunes there were several moving black spots. Those were people running. Those people were shouting and running toward the oasis. Those are the slaves of Luoya City. Su Gu's eyes were good. After the slaves ran closer and closer, he distinguished them. They are second brother's slaves. I've seen the person in front. A few days ago, I heard that he was ordered by second brother to go out of the city. At that time, Su Gu wanted to inquire about what his second brother was going to do, but he could not find out. Those people disappeared after leaving the city, and the people Su Gu sent to follow them returned without success. He did not expect to see them here. There seems to be something terrible chasing behind them, Lei said. He could feel the fast approaching crisis, like encountering a powerful beast in the mountains. There was a kind of chill that made people's teeth tremble. Xian. Tuo looked at Xiao Xian, his eyes asking how to react later. Xiao Xian made a gesture which meant to quietly watch during the hunt. After all, this was not the Yanjiao tribe but the slave owners' territory. They did not need to fight desperately. As the slaves ran closer and closer, Xiao Xian saw that on the sand there was sand flowing. It seemed that something under the sand was shuttling quickly and circling to the front of the slaves. Boom! In front of the slaves, the sand burst open, and a huge figure rushed out from under the sand. Rough scales with thorns covered the whole body. Its round pupils locked on the people running on the sand. On the upper half of its body, it opened its big mouth like a python about to swallow its prey. Even its neck swelled up and its big mouth with sharp teeth was like a shovel. After falling, it suddenly turned sideways. In the blink of an eye, the 4 slaves, along with the sand on the ground, were shoveled into the mouth of the giant beast. Quicksand beast. It's a quicksand beast. On the oasis side, a slave screamed. Quicksand beasts were said to be able to make quicksand, so they were given this name. At the same time, some people called them the king of beasts in the desert, not only because of their huge body and powerful attack power, but also because of their sand-like body. Their skin, blood, bones, and so on were the color of yellow sand. Especially their horns, the color was very similar to gold. The slave owners were very fond of using their skin and bones to make utensils, especially the golden horn. Many big slave owners used it to make crowns. However, in the desert, quicksand beasts were not common. When they appeared, it was only to hunt, and humans were not on its main diet. Therefore, many times, quicksand beasts would not take the initiative to hunt humans. They probably felt that humans were too small, not enough to fill the gaps between their teeth, so they did not want to waste time hunting. Now, this angry quicksand beast had been chasing the slaves. The most likely situation was that the slaves took the initiative to provoke it. I know, second brother wants to hunt the quicksand beast for father as a birthday gift. Su Gu shouted. The second young master of Luoya City sent slaves out to hunt the quicksand beast. Now it seemed that the people sent out not only did not succeed in the hunt, but were also chased by the quicksand beast. Now, it also involved the people of the oasis. Chapter 306. When the quicksand beast shoveled its mouth, the other slaves had already fled to the oasis. As soon as the first slave rushed into the oasis, he was kicked by Ai Shur until he vomited blood. Unexpectedly, such a beast was attracted to the oasis. Ai Shur was so angry that his fists were clenched. If they were not the second young master's people but his own men, he would have already cut them down. Get ready? Ai Shur shouted. The guards of the oasis all stared nervously at the other side. The quicksand beast could be defeated, but every time they won they would pay a heavy price. Over there, the quicksand beast that had digested a mouthful of food looked in the direction of the oasis. Its golden eyes stared at the people guarding the edge of the oasis. Even if it was hot weather at this time, it made people feel like they were in an ice field. This was a ferocious creature. Yanjiao and the other 2 people thought. Staring at the oasis, the quicksand beast did not immediately come over, nor did it pull out the other half of its body buried under the sand. Instead, it slowly shook the half of its body that was exposed to the ground, and its head was still slightly moving up and down. This was not to agree with anything, nor was it counting the number of people but a signal to attack. Be careful. Ai Shur shouted. Even if he did not understand this creature, Xiao Xian could intuitively judge the next response. Without the slightest hesitation, when the quicksand beast nodded again, he shouted to remind Lei and Tua, "Retreat!" Slamming his knees on the ground, Xiao Xian quickly bounced away. At the position where he had just stood, a sand arrow composed of sand shot there, bursting and scattering. The rapidly splashing sand hit the people like tens of thousands of knives scraping. The slaves who could not avoid it in time could not help but scream. It was the sand ejected from the quicksand beast's mouth. It was the effect of the sand spit out from the shoveled mouth. Xiao Xian did not need to worry about Lei and Tuo's reaction. Xiao Xian still believed in it. On Su Gu's side there was Wuxia to protect him. He had already retreated, so Xiao Xian did not need to worry. Taking Lei and Tua to Su Gu's side, Xiao Xian asked, "What are the weaknesses of the quicksand beast?" Weakness. Wuxia did not know. Generally, when we encounter a quicksand beast, we will attack its eyes. This was also the method they often used when encountering other beasts. As for specifically targeting the weakness of the quicksand beast, Wuxia really did not know. Not only Wuxia but the others also didn't know. Even because of the great slave owner's love and high evaluation of the quicksand beast's skin and bones, the slaves had deified such a beast. They felt that this was the king of beasts in the desert. It had no absolute weakness and could only be fought with manpower and quantity. Xiao Xian and the other two looked at each other and felt helpless. They had to find a way to deal with the quicksand beast. When one did not have the power to resist directly, they had to use their wits. Since it was a battle of wits, of course, he had to take advantage of the prey's weakness. Xiao Xian and the other two watched from the side. After all, this wasn't their territory, so they wouldn't feel bad if it was destroyed. What's more, this was caused by the slave owners and slaves of Luoye City. It had nothing to do with the Yanjiao people. Over there, Ai Shi had already led people to fight against the quicksand beast that attacked the oasis. The archers wanted to shoot the quicksand beast's eyes, but they were always avoided by the quicksand beast, who had long been prepared. The hard scales and raised bones around the quicksand beast's eyes had a strong protective effect. Its defense was amazing. A series of arrows attacked, but none of them hit its eyes. The arrows were too thin and the material was only wood and stone. The attack on the quicksand beast was limited. Xiao Xian jumped on the roof of the stone house and looked over there. Many reptiles did not have such hard scales on their abdomens. However, the quicksand beast did not belong to this category. Its slightly lighter abdomen was also covered with a thick layer of defense. Its long and flat body was nearly 20 meters high. Although it was huge, its movements were flexible. It avoided the attacks of the slaves and constantly harvested the lives of the slaves. Half of its body buried under the sand drove the sand on the ground. It looked like it was in the water and the sand was lifted up in waves. The thick spear with a harsh sound pierced through the air and pierced the head of the quicksand beast. It did not hit the eyes, but it hit other parts of the head. Even if it could break the protection of the surface scales for the quicksand beast, it was not painful. The squinted eyes under the protruding eye socket bones revealed only a slit. A golden luster flowed out from this slit. Xiao Xian did not feel any sense of sacredness at all. He only felt that it was tricky. Some of the desert beasts that were still active around had all disappeared, including the black beetles that were always in front of them. They either ran away or hid deep under the sand. After the slaves of the oasis guards launched another attack, the quicksand beast not only did not leave, but it seemed to be angrier. Today the quicksand beast seemed to have eaten gunpowder. It stared at the people of the oasis and did not let go. Even if it could not attack for a while, it did not intend to leave. A hair-raising shriek that sounded like a storm blowing through a narrow gap rang out in front of the oasis. The quicksand beast opened its mouth and screamed. On its neck there were some folds that were close to the neck. At this moment, these folds were all opened with the quicksand beast's screams. The stretching made the original color of these folds a little lighter. The hard scales on the folds, under Yang Guang's gaze, exuded a golden luster. It was like a king lifting his cloak, dazzling people's eyes. Especially the golden horn on its head, it seemed to break through all obstacles, sharp and fierce. "It's really beautiful," Su Gu exclaimed next to him. Hearing Su Gu's exclamation, the blue veins on Xiao Xian's forehead bulged. At this time he still made such an exclamation. Was his brain filled with sand or was he stupid? Yanjiao's 3 people had not seen this fierce beast yet, but they were already alert. This was their intuition and experience of hunting fierce beasts for so many years. When they saw the quicksand beast rushing out, they had already raised their vigilance to the highest level. If they encountered such a fierce beast in the mountains, they would not fight but leave immediately. Lei and Tua looked at the battle situation on the edge of the oasis and felt that something was wrong. The quicksand beast seemed to have gone mad. Its body had begun to be injured, and some of the scales on its skin were broken by intensive attacks. It even bled, but it did not retreat at all. Looking at the slaves who had just escaped, the two could not help but think, did those people take the initiative to provoke and make this quicksand beast go mad? Or was the quicksand beast irritable just like a beast? Xiao Xian did not think about the reason why the quicksand beast was so crazy. Wuxia and Xiao Xian said that the quicksand beast was known as the king of all beasts in the desert and had no absolute weakness. However, Xiao Xian still wanted to observe it. In his mind, the totem's flame weakened and faded, and the egg-shaped shell had lit up. In Xiao Xian's vision, the dazzling Yangguang, the sand beast, and the land all turned dark. In Xiao Xian's vision, the quicksand beast with a golden luster was now only wrapped in a layer of dense scales. It had to be said that the quicksand beast's defense was almost invulnerable. Its eyes had shrunk into a slit, leaving the slaves with extremely limited opportunities to attack. The rest of the body was covered in hard scales. Even the wrinkles on the neck were covered in fine and dense scales. If it were not for the slave's compact and intensive attacks that made it afraid, he was afraid that it would have directly broken through. Chapter 307. Under his special vision, Xiao Xian could even see through the sand and see the scaly legs and long tail of the quicksand beast under the sand. Once, this ability could not penetrate some obstacles, but with the improvement of his ability, Xiao Xian could gradually see through some obstacles. When he was in the tribe, in the house of the two thieves, Xiao Xian used this ability to see what was buried under the soil. However, the depth of penetration was limited. The deeper he went underground, the more blurred Xiao Xian could see. Therefore, even if he could see the other part of the quicksand beast under the sand, he could not see it clearly. In the past, when hunting, if he encountered strange or unfamiliar beasts, Xiao Xian would also use this method. It was just that when he hunted before, he did not have so much leisure time to observe and study. The habits of the beasts, their fighting habits, and the flaws that were easy to appear in battle, as long as there was enough time, Xiao Xian could observe them. Xiao Xian's line of sight moved to the quicksand beast that was fighting with the slaves on the edge of the oasis and constantly dodging their attacks. In such a short time, another 5 people were swallowed by the quicksand beast. For the time being, Xiao Xian could not see the weaknesses of the quicksand beast's body structure through its almost perfect defense. At least for now, it seemed that he could only break its outer scales through continuous attacks and then cause damage to it. Suddenly, Xiao Xian's eyes narrowed. He found that the powerful legs of the quicksand beast buried under the sand were bending. "Get out of the way, it's going to jump over," Xiao Xian shouted. Xiao Xian's voice just fell. At the edge of the oasis, where the quicksand beast was, countless grains of sand were lifted. The huge body of the quicksand beast jumped out of the sand, and the whole body was completely pulled out of the sand. The sand and dust rushed up like a reverse waterfall, but after reaching a high point, it flowed down. When it jumped into the air, the quicksand beast's long tail was still swinging vigorously, making adjustments. The quicksand beast lost its patience and did not intend to continue to fight with those people there. It jumped out of the battle circle, but it did not retreat. Instead, it directly jumped over the nearly 5-meter-high wall made of wood and stone on the periphery of the oasis, smashing into the oasis and began to wantonly destroy. Xiao Xian reminded him quickly. Lei and Tua, as well as Wuxia with Sugu, once again avoided it. Xiao Xian originally intended to retreat, but he saw a gap in the quicksand beast. The gap existed below the side of the quicksand beast's neck, under the cloak-like folds on its neck. Moreover, the gap did not always exist, but when the quicksand beast roared, it would open. When the quicksand beast stopped roaring, the gap would disappear like a closed door. Jumping into the oasis, the quicksand beast vigorously swung its long tail. Its powerful front claws and hind legs were also constantly stepping forward. Its hard body, like an armored vehicle, directly knocked down a sandstone house and collapsed it. Dust and sand flew in all directions as if a sandstorm had appeared. At the same time, the creator of the sandstorm was still moving around freely in the oasis. Wherever it went, it brought the sandstorm and destruction with it. The slaves' attacks became hasty and disorderly, and even some slaves in the crisis accidentally hurt their companions. Aisha shouted. However, the slaves who were originally stationed in the oasis did not have a tacit understanding with the people brought by Aisha. For a time the oasis was chaotic. Wuxia took Sugu out of the oasis and observed the battle over there. The house where Xiao Xian had just stood had been swept down by the quicksand beast's tail. Looking for an opportunity, Xiao Xian rushed to a tree, whistled, made a few gestures in the air, and then immediately jumped away. He kept dodging, avoiding the main attack range of the quicksand beast but not far away. What does Xian want to do? Lei asked Tua next to him. He wanted to rush over with his knife, but was stopped by Tua. I don't know what he plans to do, but since Xian did not let us go, it's better to wait first. Tua said. While the slaves in the oasis were fighting with the quicksand beast, a shadow flew quickly in the sky and scratched the back of the quicksand beast with its claws. The eagle's claws collided with the scales on the back of the quicksand beast, making a creaking sound that made people tremble. Like metal cutting. The scales on the back were the hardest part of the quicksand beast's body. However, Cha-Cha's claws were not easy to bear. It left a deep mark on the back of the quicksand beast. Although there was no blood, if one looked carefully, the skin and flesh were already broken. Looking at the eagle's shadow flying in the air, the quicksand beast's eyes flashed with a golden light. Its claws swept away a house in front of it. It looked up at the eagle in the air and screamed. The wrinkles on its neck exploded because of the roar, like an angry lion. Cha-Cha in the air also seemed to deliberately provoke it. It also screamed at the quicksand beast and looked for opportunities to grab its claws. After several times, the quicksand beast looked up again and roared into the air. Now is the time. Xiao Xian looked at the cloak on the neck of the quicksand beast and locked the crack under the cloak. His legs instantly burst with a powerful thrust, like a silent wind, rushing to the neck of the quicksand beast under the cloak. Looking up at the eagle in the air, the quicksand beast felt that something was wrong. In a split second, it instinctively stopped roaring, moved the bones of its neck and closed the gap. However, it was still a step too late. Xiao Xian, who rushed out, held the handle of the stone knife with both hands. A second before the gap closed, he stabbed the knife into the narrow gap that was about to close. In other people's eyes, that crack was not distinguishable because it was the same color as the other places. It was covered in scales. However, that layer of scales was sparsely distributed. It was only because of the color of the skin and the fact that it was often covered by wrinkles that it was difficult to see. At the moment when the stone knife pierced, Xiao Xian only felt that the stone knife in his hand seemed to have pierced into a dense collection of high-quality stones. The resistance was great, and every time it went in, he could hear the sound of the stone knife scraping the bones under the skin. Fortunately, it was only a collection of stones, not a whole slate. In this way, there was always a gap for the knife to find a chance to move forward, even if those gaps were only small gaps that were difficult to be recognized by the naked eye. Chi, a harsh scream sounded. Unlike the warning roar just now, it was a more unbearable sound wave. This was not a deliberate attack but a physiological reaction. It was also a cry of pain after being hit by this attack. The quicksand beast swung its big head, trying to bite off the small hand that threatened its neck. However, there was a blind spot. The quicksand beast could not bite that place no matter how hard it tried, and its front claws could not scratch it. After several failed attempts, the quicksand beast rushed to the remaining stone houses in the oasis. Bang! The remaining stone houses were knocked down one after another. Every time it hit, the quicksand beast deliberately slammed its neck into those stone houses. Xiao Xian, who had stabbed the knife into the neck of the quicksand beast, grabbed the handle of the knife with one hand and clasped the scales of the quicksand beast with the other to prevent himself from falling. The quicksand beast's self-harming way of slamming into houses did indeed bring a lot of trouble to Xiao Xian. His back collided with the stone and soil. Xiao Xian could even hear the sound of bones dislocating in his body. Fortunately, his physique was strong and he could temporarily withstand such pressure. Xian. Lei and Tua wanted to help, but they were stopped by Xiao Xian. Get out of the way. Don't come over. At this time, Lei and Tua could not help much. At this moment, the quicksand beast had completely changed from its madness to anger and panic. It did not know why such a small guy could bring such a huge threat to itself, and the place where the attack was made was the most vulnerable part of its body. Hitting houses and trees, knocking down a large area in succession, it did not knock down Xiao Xian, but the quicksand beast itself screamed several times. Every time it screamed, Xiao Xian could send the knife in again. The quicksand beast would cry out because of the pain, and Xiao Xian would seize the opportunity to send the knife. The quicksand beast, who had no choice but to roll on the ground, wanted to drill into the ground to escape. Its head had just drilled halfway into the ground when its tail was grabbed by the eagle's claws and dragged back. Cha-Cha couldn't really catch this giant beast, but it was completely possible to create a certain obstruction for it. As soon as he saw that the quicksand beast wanted to drill into the ground, Cha-Cha grabbed its tail and dragged it in the opposite direction. Xiao Xian was pressed down by the neck folds of the quicksand beast, and it felt like a heavy object was whipping him. Looking at the stone knife that had sunk into the flesh, leaving only the handle, Xiao Xian retracted his arm and clenched his fist. The totem power gathered in his arm, and in his veins the blood seemed to be squeezed. Xiao Xian could even hear the bursting sound of the bones and muscles in his arm because of the flow of the totem power. The blue veins bulged and burst. His fist was aimed at the bottom of the hilt where the quicksand beast's roar had once again opened a slit. After accumulating his strength, his whole arm suddenly slammed forward. The powerful force suddenly hit, and the place where it hit, the vibrating ripples spread out. Under the skin, the gaps connected to the internal organs like pores. Under the bones that desperately wanted to gather, the hard meat was like tofu that was violently shaken and shattered. Chi, a sharper and more harsh roar sounded. Blood that was almost the same color as the sand dunes sprayed out from the mouth of the quicksand beast, and Xiao Xian himself was also splashed with blood from the place where he was bombarded. The blood of the quicksand beast was not as hot as its color, but with a chill. It was effective. Xiao Xian did not have time to rest. Once again he punched the place where he had just bombarded. The quicksand beast collapsed under such bombardment, collapsed and collapsed again. The collision was ineffective. Even if the neck folds were squeezed tightly, it could not stop Xiao Xian's attack again and again. The screeching sound continued, and the rolling sand and dust covered the entire oasis with a layer of sand. The other people around, including Su Gu who was protected by Wuxia, were shocked to see the rolling figure in the sand. What happened in the end? Why did the quicksand beast suddenly react like this? Just now, which tribesman rushed over? What happened after he rushed over? What did he do? They couldn't know. Just looking at the huge figure that was screaming and rolling, the slaves who had just been fighting with the quicksand beast could not help but swallow their saliva. What the hell was going on? Chapter 308. The cries of pain gradually weakened, and the movement of rolling and crawling slowly slowed down. Above the desert, a gust of wind blew to the oasis, taking away the sand and dust of the oasis. The turbid sand curtain faded and dispersed, revealing the figure inside in front of everyone. Originally, the many stone houses in the oasis had been destroyed by 2/3. The remaining houses, even if they did not fall, were damaged in part. The ground was uneven, and the surrounding houses and trees were covered with a thick layer of sand. Where the spring was usually clear, the spring water had become turbid. There was a lot of dust floating on the water surface. If the water wanted to be clear again, they would have to wait at least one night. In the area between the collapsed house and the spring, there was a high bulge, with only a section of the tail exposed outside. At this moment, Cha-Cha was grabbing the tail and dragging it out a little bit. Its strength, compared to the size of the quicksand beast, was still small. The quicksand beast forcibly drilled into the ground, and it was also desperately dragging it out. Unfortunately, it was still weak. However, fortunately, the quicksand beast was now dead and could no longer continue to drill in. Xian, Lei and Tua rushed over. They did not care if the quicksand beast was really dead or if it was still dangerous. They went over and lifted the top layer of sand. What are you looking at? Hurry up and help. Su Gu shouted. He directed the slaves to go over and pull out the quicksand beast. The slaves were still somewhat vigilant, but seeing that the two tribesmen were all right, they became bold and gathered together to work together. Boom. A figure broke out of the sand under the sand, scaring the slaves who were pulling. Their hands loosened and they fell to the ground. However, after seeing that it was a person who came out, they relaxed. Xian, are you okay? Lei and Tua went over and pulled Xiao Xian out. Cough. Xiao Xian cleared the sand in his mouth and in his ears and nose. He took a deep breath and said, "It's okay, just a few broken bones." Such an injury was not too serious for Xiao Xian. A day's rest would be a lot better. After checking Xiao Xian's injury, Lei and Tua were relieved and went to pull the quicksand beast out of the sand. Looking at the motionless quicksand beast that was completely pulled out, the slaves looked at each other, seemingly unable to believe it. Dead? Is he really dead? How did he die? What's going on? The slaves were puzzled and glanced at Xiao Xian. They looked at Xiao Xian with fear in their eyes. Ha ha ha. Su Gu looked at the dead quicksand beast and laughed out loud. Seeing that the slaves who had led the quicksand beast were approaching, the smile on his face instantly changed. He coldly said, Why do you want to grab the prey? It was Yinjiao that killed him, not you. According to the rules here, Yinjiao's people cooperated with Su Gu. Naturally, part of the results obtained could also be attributed to Su Gu. Su Gu could completely say that this was his thing. But, third young master. The slaves still wanted to argue, but they looked at the huge quicksand beast on the ground with an unwilling expression. They wanted to say that this was not all the credit of the Yinjiao people. With just 2 or 3 people, what could they do? Wasn't it all the work of the people stationed in the oasis? Most of the injuries on the quicksand beast were caused by these slaves. What did it have to do with the Yinjiao people? At most, the Yinjiao people encountered an opportunity. When the quicksand beast was not good enough, they added a bit of strength. How could this dead quicksand beast be regarded as the third young master's thing? Go to the side. Su Gu shouted, raising his hand to point to the slaves. You didn't mention it. You failed to catch the quicksand beast, but you actually led the quicksand beast to the oasis. You see what you have done to the oasis. The number of guards on this side of the oasis was indeed a lot, but today, because of AI Sure, not long before the quicksand beast came, nearly 2/3 of the guards were sent to several places near the oasis to patrol and search for suspicious people. So when the quicksand beast rushed over, those who were sent out did not come back in time to help. By the time they arrived, the quicksand beast was already rolling around and digging the ground because of Xiao Xian, making a haze of sand in the oasis. The slaves who heard the call for help and rushed back, looked at the slave's eyes and suddenly became unkind. They actually dared to lead the quicksand beast here. What was even more unfortunate was that today, when most of the people went out to search and then looked at the destroyed oasis, if the king knew, he would definitely go crazy. And once the king went crazy, the unlucky ones would definitely be the slaves, especially the slaves guarding the oasis. A fierce-looking slave went to Ai Shi's side. He was one of the people in charge of the oasis guards. When the quicksand beast attacked the oasis, they were looking for a suspicious person. They did not think that the person would not be found, and when they came back they would encounter this. He whispered a few words to Ai Shi, and did not look at the slaves of the second young master. He directed people to repair the house. His master was the king of Luoya City, not a young master. Slaves of this level were directly under the king's orders. Even if it was the young master, he could not command them, let alone the slaves of the young master. No one would blame him for killing these slaves. After hearing the news reported by the man, Ai Shi carefully thought about it. All this seemed to be too coincidental. Why would the quicksand beast attack here when the main guards of the oasis were sent out? The second young master sent people to hunt the quicksand beast, so he should have a certain degree of certainty. It should not be like this. This matter was not simple. Perhaps, it was still the work of those people in Baisha City. You few, come back with me to see the king. Ai Shi pointed to the slaves who led the quicksand beast over and said. As soon as they heard that they wanted to see the king, the slaves suddenly felt their legs go soft, their faces desperate. Ai Shi did not look at them much. He went to Su Gu's side and said, Third young master, please go with me to see the king. This time Su Gu did not lose his temper. He also felt that there was something wrong with this. He nodded and said, okay. Since he promised to see the king, Su Gu could bring the quicksand beast back to his father and give it to him. Ai Shi did not call Xiao Xian and the other two. He still looked at the 3 people with suspicion and vigilance. Xiao Xian did not care. His main purpose was not to make a good impression in front of these people. What these people thought, he did not care. This time he could only watch from the side, but he chose to risk attacking the quicksand beast for Dao Yu. According to Su Gu, the 3 Yinjiao people went directly to Baisha City to find Dao Yu. Most of the cities in the desert were not friendly to the tribes. Of course, this was also secondary. The important thing was that Xiao Xian did not know if he could really find Dao Yu after sneaking into Baisha City. However, if he could go with them to Beast City, then it would be different. Not only could he see Dao Yu, but he could also see the legendary Beast City. To go to Beast City, the best was naturally with Su Gu. If Su Gu could make a good impression in front of the Luoya City king, then he would naturally have the opportunity to go to Beast City. In the past, there were tribes who used similar methods to go there. On the day when Ai Shi and the others returned to Luoya City, many people saw the quicksand beast being dragged into the city on a cart. Before separating from Su Gu's group, Xiao Xian whispered a few words to Su Gu. Su Gu, who was originally angry because of other people's suspicious eyes, heard those words and his eyes lit up. He said to Xiao Xian, Good. If it is successful, I will definitely help you find Dao Yu. Chapter 309. What kind of person was the king of Luoya City? Xiao Xian had not seen him since he came to Luoya City. He rarely learned more from other people. What he knew was what everyone knew. Before Xiao Xian separated from Su Gu, what he said to him was actually the weakness of the quicksand beast. The Yanjiao people lived in the ferocious beast mountain forest, which Su Gu knew. He also felt that the reason why Xiao Xian could say the weakness of the quicksand beast was probably because he often came into contact with the beast. As for Xiao Xian, he did not have much doubt. Even if he did, he would not ask. The two sides were in a cooperative relationship, so as long as it was beneficial to everyone, it was fine. As for other secrets, what harm was there in not mentioning it? Su Gu intended to give the quicksand beast as one of his birthday gifts to the Luoya City king, plus the stone that Su Gu liked very much. In Su Gu's view, it was already a very good gift. However, in order to get more chips, Xiao Xian told Su Gu about the weakness of the quicksand beast. This could also be sent as one of his birthday gifts, even more important than the quicksand beast. After all, the cost of killing a quicksand beast was too high. Knowing the weakness and then hunting it was different. The slave owners of Luoya City already knew how to lure out a quicksand beast, and Xiao Xian's information could undoubtedly reduce the consumption to a large extent. As for whether the Luoya City king would attribute the abnormality of the quicksand beast to Xiao Xian's group, Su Gu had to solve it. After returning to his residence in the city, Xiao Xian carefully recalled the abnormality after the appearance of the quicksand beast. Based on his years of hunting experience, the quicksand beast seemed to have been angered. It was not necessarily the second young master's people but someone else. Moreover, the timing was just right. It had a feeling of luring the tiger away from the mountain. As soon as the oasis guards left, the quicksand beast arrived. Was it really a coincidence? Xiao Xian did not think so. Thinking of what Ai Shi had said before, Xiao Xian couldn't help but think of Dao Yu, who was said to be a slave in Baishir City. Putting aside other things, Dao Yu, this person, was ruthless and merciless. Xiao Xian was not worried. What he was afraid of was that he was not only ruthless but also scheming. He was a great threat to the Flaming Horns tribe. The next day, Su Gu came to the Yanjiao embassy to find Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked at the third young master of the Turtle clan. Although he looked tired and exhausted, his eyes were filled with joy. It seems that things are going well, Xiao Xian said. Yes. Su Gu did not elaborate on what happened after entering the palace, but he told Xiao Xian that his second brother was criticized by the Luoya king. Several of the slaves who led the quicksand beast to the oasis were also executed. Su Gu, however, was rewarded for his good gift. The benefits that were previously reduced were all made up for. Su Gu proposed a group of slaves who had not recognized their masters, and the Luoya king agreed after being surprised. What is the reason for the quicksand beast's madness? Have you found out? Xiao Xian asked. I heard from the oasis guards who tracked the suspicious characters that it may be the Baishir people who did it. I just don't know how they made the quicksand beast crazy. When Su Li's slaves were trapping and hunting the quicksand beast, they were also interfered with. They failed and suffered heavy losses. However, my father said that a failure is a failure and there is no excuse. So he let Su Lu reflect this time. Is it related to Dao Yu? Xiao Xian asked. I don't know. Su Gu told the truth. His own manpower was limited and he could not inquire more. However, what you said about the weakness of the quicksand beast made my father very happy. If we didn't know the weakness of the quicksand beast, we would have to worry about the Baishir people bringing more crazy quicksand beasts to cause trouble. But now that we know, my father hopes that there will be a few more so that we can kill more. My father wants to use the quicksand beast to make clothes and new crowns. Speaking of this, Su Gu's smile widened. My father agreed to let me follow. I grew up so big, but I followed when I was very young. Because he did not have his own slaves, Su Gu had been excluded from the big events. In the annual Beast City gathering in the desert, the eldest young master Su Ka and the second young master Su Lu took turns to follow. Now Su Gu got such an opportunity. I also said your things. When the time comes, you will go with me. Su Gu said. This was indeed good news for Xiao Xian. Have you picked the slaves? Xiao Xian asked. My father allowed me to pick 20. This batch of slaves has been picked. He said to wait for the next batch of slaves to come, and then let me continue to pick. Su Gu excitedly said. The enslavement is complete? Xiao Xian asked. When it came to enslavement, Su Gu's excited look was slightly restrained. I enslaved 3 but only succeeded in 1. If the enslavement failed, they would die. Xiao Xian knew that, so he did not ask about the other 2 slaves. Su Gu's face was full of ridicule. He didn't know if it was self-deprecating or ridiculing others. You don't know that when I went to pick the slaves, those slaves seemed to see death. It seemed that the people I picked would die. When Su Ka appeared, those people seemed to see hope. Bang. With a tisk, one could tell that the third young master was very dissatisfied with the slaves' reactions, and the reality was also a blow to him. Although 1 out of 3 succeeded, compared to the 90% success rate of the others, he was really not good enough. I'll practice again. Su Gu began to spontaneously mobilize the power in his body. The palm of his outstretched hand sprang up with a blue flame. Xiao Xian looked at Su Gu, who had already entered the state of training. He did not disturb him, but observed the flame that appeared again in his mind. That was Su Gu's flame. The boundary between red and blue in the flame was very clear. The two flames gathered together and intertwined with each other. When Su Gu was training the enslavement, the blue flame in the flame was unusually active. Su Gu could get benefits from Xiao Xian, and Xiao Xian could also get benefits. The most direct reaction was that there were more blue flames in the totem flame belonging to Yanjiao. After half a day at the end of the practice, Su Gu felt that his enslavement power was more skillful. He believed that when he went back to enslavement today, it would be smoother and he could successfully enslave more people. After the ability is locked, the slave's promotion is limited? Xiao Xian asked. Basically, that's the case. Su Gu said. Is there an exception? It is said that there are some, but very few. Those who can break through the shackles must be very terrible. Su Gu said. After Su Gu left, Xiao Xian mobilized the totem power in his body. The dark flame-like lines had passed 2/3 of the forearm, closer to the wrist. Before leaving the tribe, the totem lines on Xiao Xian's arm showed that there were not so many. However, after experiencing the Rain tribe and here, the totem lines went one step further. For Yanjiao's totem warriors, the display of the totem lines was the most direct proof of their strength. The totem lines on the arm over the elbow belonged to the intermediate totem warriors. The closer it was to the wrist, the closer it was to the senior totem warriors. Xian, there are changes in the other tribes. Tua came in and said. Xiao Xian and the other two in the city also always paid attention to the movements of the other tribes. Some time ago, these tribes led teams out of the city from time to time. It was said that they went to the desert to gain experience and came back a few days later. This time it seemed that the movement was bigger. Those people are leaving one after another. Lei told Xiao Xian about his discovery today. Yesterday the people in the city came back and were packing up. I also saw someone rushing to make new stone tools. I thought it was time for the long journey and we have to go back, but in fact it is not the case. Today the Tianshan tribe and the Thousand Masked tribe left the city. The other tribes also seem to be preparing to leave. I heard that the Hui tribe will go out of the city in 2 days but not to go back. They are going to the desert. Xian, where do you think they are going? If they wanted to end the long journey and return to the tribe, they should inform the people in Yanjiao. Where were these people going in the end? What happened in the desert recently? Xiao Xian thought about it and only thought of one thing. Beast City. It was the annual carnival of the slave owners. All the big slave owners who were willing to participate would take people to the Beast City. The rest of the tribe might want to take this opportunity to do something, which might be related to the things that those people were hiding. Xiao Xian thought about it in his heart and said to Lei and Tua, no matter how the other tribes are arranged, we have to prepare. After the Luoya City King's birthday, we have to set off for Beast City. Chapter 310. The birthday of Luoya City's big slave owner, Luoya City King Su Luan, was very lively. On that day Xiao Xian did not go out of the house because it would be more troublesome if he went out. On this day the whole city celebrated. Even if they could not laugh, they had to laugh. Even if they could not celebrate, they had to bite the bullet to celebrate. The other slave owners in the city would be carried around the city, scattering things. Sometimes it was shell money and sometimes it was other things such as food. This was a gift from the king. The slaves who encountered these situations would gratefully kneel on the ground. Looking around, there was a large group of people kneeling. Xiao Xian did not want to stand out from the crowd. In the past few days, people in the tribal area left the city one after another. It seemed that the previous departure was really just training. This time Xiao Xian could feel the dignified atmosphere from them. When they first came over, those young and frivolous warriors had now become a lot calmer, with more murderous aura in their behavior. Before they left, they did not say anything to the 3 people from Yanjiao. They only let Xiao Xian and the other 2 wait in the city. When they all came back, it was time to leave and return to the tribe. However, these people did not know that Xiao Xian and the other two would follow Su Gu to Beast City. The two moons in the sky were getting closer and closer, beginning to change into a full moon. The desert at night had a layer of silver-white light. Standing at a high place and looking into the distance, one could often see the shadows of some nocturnal beasts in the desert outside the city. Lei and Tuo walked into Xiao Xian's house and said, "Everything is ready. Tomorrow they would leave the city. Tonight they had to get everything ready and leave at any time tomorrow. These 3 cloth clothes were sent by Su Gu's people today. You each take one." Xiao Xian pointed to the 3 long cloth coats next to him, still in the style of a hood. This was what Xiao Xian asked Su Gu to find someone to make. The color of the cloth was dark and very low-key. However, the material was not the kind worn by the slaves but Su Gu's stock. Lei and Tuo were seeing such clothes for the first time and felt very novel. "By the way, Xian, what about that camel?" Lei asked. If the camel was left in the city, Su Gu could find someone to help look after it, but it was not safe. Who knew when someone would come out and slaughter the camel? Especially Su Gu's second brother, who now looked at the eyes of the 3 people in Yanjiao, was not very good. "It's going with us," Xiao Xian said, then added, "It chose to go with us." Speaking of this, Xiao Xian also felt that it was funny. During the day he had asked Mud whether it would leave with them or stay here. Mud took a few steps forward, which meant that it was telling Xiao Xian that it chose to leave with him. The next day. Early in the morning, the loud and clear sound of the bone horn resounded throughout the city. The city, which was usually quiet at this time, was now filled with the sounds of people running. Other than the human voices, there were also the roars of beasts. This morning was destined not to be quiet. When the sun came out, Xiao Xian and the other 2 took the camel and left with the people sent by Su Gu. Outside, some slaves in leather armor had lined up and stood on the main road in the city. These people were different from the ordinary slaves in the city. They were all used to guard the army. A strange-looking beast was led out by the senior slaves. It opened its bloody mouth and roared at the others around it, as if it was going to rush over and bite them. Bang bang bang, heavy footsteps sounded at the end of the road. A beast nearly 8 meters high came over. It looked a bit like a lizard, with a thick layer of cuticle covering its body with stripes. After a few steps, it would reveal a forked tongue. Such a beast served as a sedan bearer, carrying the king of Luoya City on its back. Behind the giant beast there were several slave owners who followed. They were riding their own domesticated beasts, but their size was much smaller than the king's. Su Gu rode on a beast that looked like a hyena. He waved to Xiao Xian and the other 2, motioning them to follow. Next to him there were 3 camels prepared for Xiao Xian and the other 2. Xiao Xian was leading one, while Lei and Tuo turned over and rode on the other 2 camels. In the traveling team the slaves were all on foot. Only the slave owners could ride their beasts. Xiao Xian and the other 2 were special. They were not slaves, nor did they belong to the slave owners. However, they did not have to run like the slaves, so Su Gu got 3 camels. Xiao Xian turned over and rode the camel. He felt the attention of a line of sight. He looked sideways and saw a young man with a calm face. The man looked similar to Xiao Xian, but at this moment the cold light in his eyes crossed the surrounding crowd and fell straight on Xiao Xian. Sulu? The second young master of Luoya City? Also, because of the oasis, the second young master put all his resentment on Xiao Xian and the other 2. Originally, he should have followed the Luoya City king to the Beast City, but because of Su Gu's treasure plus the oasis, he was ordered to defend the city with the eldest young master Su Ka. Naturally, his heart was not happy. Xiao Xian asked Su Gu, after the Luoya City king left with the team, would the young masters in the city take the opportunity to seize the throne? Su Gu's answer was, they did not dare. In addition to most of the slaves in the city belonging to the king, there was also the factor of strength. They were afraid of the Luoya City king Su Luan. Before they had enough strength, they would not dare to usurp the throne. Xiao Xian took back his line of sight and looked at Su Gu in front of him. Su Gu successfully enslaved 14 slaves. This time he brought them with him, probably to observe these people. In addition to Wu Shi, who was still with him, Su Gu brought a total of 15 slaves this time. A guard next to him had a ferocious face when facing the other slaves on the street. But when he turned around and looked at Su Gu, the aloof expression on his face suddenly converged. He trotted over and handed over a plate of fruit. The compliments were skillfully spoken out with a flattering smile on his face. If it was before, Su Gu would not receive such treatment. Even if the slaves remained respectful to Su Gu, they would not be so courteous. Now it was different. Su Gu, the third young master, was able to successfully enslave and have his own slaves. He was also taken by the king to the beast city, so the other people's attitudes were naturally different. Su Gu casually picked a fruit and looked at the city gate in front of him. He exhaled a long breath and stabilized his excited mood. After the king's team left the city, Sula could no longer suppress his inner anger. He went back and smashed all the things in the house. However, the people in the city did not care so much. At least, Su Gu and Xiao Xian's mood was very good. Beast City was a little far from Luoya City. Speaking of Beast City, it was a relatively special place in the desert. Because although it was a desert, the weather was different from other places in the desert. It was much cooler than other places and the temperature was low. After all, the slave owners went to Beast City not to suffer, but to enjoy. Chapter 311. Above the desert, the team of Luoya City had been walking towards the target. The team of more than 2,000 people was comparable to the previous Yanjiao tribe's entire tribe. In the middle of the team, a huge beast was walking with tortoise steps. Xiao Xian could clearly hear the friction between its huge claws and the yellow sand. There were also some beasts around that were led by the slaves. Sometimes, when they saw an active desert beast not far away, they would make a ruckus and then be violently suppressed. Even the one that Su Gu was riding needed Su Gu to suppress and appease from time to time. In contrast, among the beasts in the team, the quietest and calmest was probably the camel that Xiao Xian and the other two were riding. It was not known if they were really calm or if their nerve reflexes were slow. The air was no longer as hot as it was at the beginning, and there was still some coolness in the afternoon. This was the 10th day since they left Luoya City. Among the slaves walking in the team, there were also some who couldn't bear it and fell down for various reasons. Basically, they couldn't get up after falling down. In the slave owners' team there was a fixed rule. Those who fell down and could not get up in a short time would all be fed to the beasts. The tribe had never been so cruel. Even if Xiao Xian and the other two were not used to it at first, the days gradually passed and they became numb. This was the rule of the slave world. It was not known if those who died for various reasons would regret their original choice before they closed their eyes. "We're almost there," Su Gu whispered to Xiao Xian and the other two. Over a tall old sand dune they stood on the sand ridge and looked around. Between the yellow undulating sand, there were many white places which were snow. The wind that blew in his face was still cold and frothy. It's snowing here?" Lei looked at the place in front of him in surprise. He thought that in such a place in such a season, even if the temperature was low, there would be no snow. After all, in his impression, the desert was a hot and dry place during the day. But now his impression was overturned. "What about the city? I only see the desert." Tuo looked into the distance. Apart from the snowy desert, he saw nothing else. The beast city is still some distance from here, but it already belongs to the scope of the beast-fighting desert. Su Gu told the three of them what he knew. Although there was a lot of snow in this area, the air here was still dry. The air was too cold and dry to melt the snow on the ground, so the snow directly evaporated into water vapor. However, snow was the only source of water in this beast-fighting desert. The walking beasts bowed their heads from time to nibble on the snow to quench their thirst. They could open their stomachs to drink water, but they could not eat the snow. Nibbling too much snow at one time would make them sick or even die. Therefore, the people and beasts in the group would pick up some snow from the ground and chew on it after walking for a while. There was no shortage of water here, but it was too cold. Those with weak constitutions would not be able to withstand it. Some birds could be seen flying in the sky in the distance, but they were not wild birds. They were domesticated birds from other cities. They were probably scouting the surroundings to see which teams had arrived. Xiao Xian was listening to Su Gu talk about the desert when he heard an eagle's cry in the air. "Only Cha-Cha. Someone is coming," Xiao Xian said. Su Gu believed in Cha-Cha's judgment. Saying someone is coming here, it must be in the form of a large team. Which city? Su Gu wondered. Next to him, Wuxia thought of something and his face changed. He walked a few steps and went around to the other side to face the team. "Third young master, be careful. They may be people from Baishir City," Wuxia said. Baishir City and Luoya City's walking routes and destinations were not the same, but if the routes of the two sides were compared, one would find that there was an intersection. At this moment they were just at the intersection. It was really a narrow road for enemies. The team was still moving forward at the original speed. The people of Luoya City would not avoid meeting old enemies. In that case they would be regarded as afraid. Where would the king's face go? Above the ridge in the distance, there was a team's shadow. Roar, a beastly roar that sounded like muffled thunder came from that direction. Even from such a distance they could feel the impact of a heavy hammer. It's the Baisher king's riding beast, Sugu said. He still had some impression of that cry. The huge figure of the Luoya City King's riding beast finally appeared in everyone's sight. Similar to the team on the Luoya City side, there were many other beasts of different sizes around the king's riding beast. Some were pulled by the slaves for the beast city, while others were the slave owners' mounts. Xian. Tuo and Lei looked at Xiao Xian. Let's take a look first. Xiao Xian knew what they were going to say. Yanjiao's trader was likely to be in that team. The two teams' walking routes were almost in an X shape, and at the moment they were at the intersection. The other side seemed to speed up a little, not wanting to miss this side. As the two sides got closer and closer, the fighting beasts on both sides seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. No matter how many slaves pulled them, they bared their teeth and roared at the other team as if they wanted to rush up and bite. As they got closer, both teams began to be alert. Xiao Xian saw that the slaves of Luoya City had picked up wooden and stone shields, and the archers were also ready. Was this a fight before entering the city? Xiao Xian motioned for Lei and Tuo to pay attention. The slaves of Luoya City would protect the slave owners, but they would not care about the three of them. Roar, another beast roared. Because this time it was closer, it was deafening and the impact was stronger. Roar, the Luoya City King's riding beast was not willing to fall behind and roared back. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Almost at the same time from both teams hundreds of arrows were shot. Among them there were also spears with greater impact. The senior slaves guarded the slave owners' sides, and the slaves of the slave owners also seized the opportunity to show their loyalty. The more dangerous the situation, the more opportunities there were. The newly enslaved slaves around Sugu were like this. They could not wait to squeeze in and block for Sugu. Wherever they saw an arrow they would gather there. They were afraid that when the chaos was over, there would be no arrow on their wooden shields. There would be no trace left, which meant that they did not do their best. Because they all went to the slave owner's side, Xiao Xian's side immediately became empty. Xiao Xian supported himself with one hand on the camel's back. His body jumped from the camel's back and flipped over. His other hand waved the stone knife in his hand, picking up the arrows that were shot over. After picking up a round, Xiao Xian did not continue to stay on the camel's back. After landing, he blocked the arrows that were shot over. He did not like to use a shield, and in such a situation with such a degree of attack, using a shield would make him feel restrained. This was a habit that the Yanjiao people had developed. Holding the knife, Xiao Xian's eyes were cold. The stone knife that he quickly waved seemed to explode into a group of gray light. In an instant, everything around him was shrouded in it. Not a single arrow was shot in, and if people were involved they would undoubtedly suffer a bloody storm of blade killings. The camel behind Xiao Xian was still holding its neck high, calmly looking around. In its spare time, it was in the mood to lower its neck to turn over some snow on the ground. Chapter 3:12. The teams on both sides were closer. Boom, boom, boom. Xiao Xian shot another round of flying arrows, grabbed a few arrows in the air and sent them back. He did not look at the archer who was shot over there. Ayo. As the team approached, the fighting beasts on both sides could not bear it. The smell of blood in the air stimulated their madness. The slaves, who had been desperately pulling the fighting beasts before, now began to weaken the pulling force. The restrained fighting beasts felt that the pulling force was reduced. This was like a signal for them, as if they heard the horn to attack. They roared and showed their fangs and claws, rushing toward the other side. The roar of the beasts was more intense, and the sound of biting covered the screams of the slaves. The smell of blood was stronger, and they did not know whether it was the blood of their companions or the snow and sand that hit their faces. Above the white snow and yellow sand, the blood was splashed all over the ground. Looking carefully, it was the lower-level slaves who made the move. The higher-level slaves did not make a move. They either just protected the slave owners or watched from the sidelines like watching a play. Their masters, the two big slave owners, were sitting on their respective riding beasts. They were also in a good mood, holding the thin, handicraft-like colored pottery with strange patterns, tasting the fruit wine inside. It seemed that everything that happened around them was an appetizer. The more intense it was, the more they were in the mood to taste the wine. The bloody scene was just a factor to liven things up. On the side of Baisher City, a fighting beast that had been released shook the mane on the side of its neck, raised its front paws, and attacked with a condescending oppressive momentum. In its blood-stained mouth, two sword-like fangs bit toward a slave in the team of Luoya City. The slave of Luoya City, on the other hand, held the rope of his own fighting beast with one hand and clenched his spear with the other hand. He rushed toward the other side, almost trying his best to stab, but it was picked up by the other side with a spear. Looking at the two big fangs getting closer and closer, the slave who was leading the fighting beast thought he would be bitten to death. But the next moment he found that the Baisher side jumped up and attacked with an oppressive momentum. The shadow swept down from the air and stepped on the head of the beast's paw on the ground. Its big mouth did not bite anyone, but it shoveled a mouthful of sand and snow. The slave who was about to be bitten to death was directly knocked away. This was not the end. Without waiting for the fighting beast to have any other reaction, it was lifted up by the whole thing, along with the 5 slaves who were holding it. Cha-Cha had been observing from the sky. After observing for a while, he felt an itch in his claws. Taking advantage of the fact that the arrows and spears on both sides were almost used up, he quickly rushed over and clawed at them. The weight of the fighting beast did not exceed Cha-Cha's maximum bearing range. Although there were still 5 people, Cha-Cha did not intend to carry them all the time. After catching the beast, he threw both the people and the beast towards the Luoya City King's riding beast. He threw them towards the huge riding beast's mouth. The confrontation between the two teams did not target the kings of the two sides, and no other attackers attacked the mounts of the kings. This seemed to be a tacit understanding. The contest between the kings would be held in the beast city, not in this desolate place where no one could witness it. At the moment, even if the huge riding beast was itching to watch the battle over there, it could only vent a few roars and could not bite the people and beasts of the other side. However, the Luoya City King's riding beast did not expect that the eagle could bring him such benefits. The king's riding beasts on both sides would not easily join the battle circle, but for the prey that was sent to their mouths, how could they not bite? A moment ago the fighting beast wanted to bite the slaves to death, but in the next moment, it became the food of this bigger riding beast. Because of Cha-Cha's disturbance, the several fighting beasts on the Baisher side obviously had some scruples. When attacking, they were distracted and looked at the sky, but this also led to their attack not being concentrated. Several fighting beasts on the Luoya City side scratched and bitten more wounds. One of them was bitten on the neck and a lot of blood splashed out. It seemed that they could not hold on to the beast city. Even if they could not fight in their best state and would be disposed of. The outer battle between the two sides continued, and the teams did not stop. The kings on both sides were still in the mood to open the curtains and smile and greet each other from dozens of meters away. Xiao Xian once again picked up the arrows that were shot over. After a few arrows were thrown back, he looked at the other side and saw the people standing on the king's riding beast. The White Stone City's riding beast was a ferocious beast that Xiao Xian had never seen before. Its body was not covered with ordinary scales, but more like pieces of stone. It had a thick and short tail with a large round ball. When it swung its tail, it was like a heavy hammer hitting the ground, causing snow and sand to fly into the air. On the riding beast, in addition to the king's palanquin, there were 3 people standing. Xiao Xian did not think that they were slave owners, but more like slaves guarding the king. And one of them had been staring at Xiao Xian's side. Xiao Xian looked back. It was a middle-aged man who looked very friendly. Unlike the other slaves who guarded the slave owners, he looked more peaceful. Seeing Xiao Xian look over, the other side also smiled at him like a kind elder. In the eyes of others, it might be a very kind and friendly smile, but Xiao Xian felt that this smile was full of killing intent. Dayu. Xiao Xian had never seen Dayu, but at this moment he was inexplicably sure that this person was the one he was looking for. To be able to stand on a riding beast, his status was not ordinary. The other side glanced at Xiao Xian, Lei and Tua, and then no longer stared at them. Instead he looked at other places as if enjoying the scenery here. The riding beasts went in different directions, taking the team forward. The Baisher people almost rubbed the tail of the Luoya team. After the collision, the two teams gradually separated and went away. The place where they had just crossed was only left with a wreckage. Some of the bodies were left there, and some were taken away to be fed to the beasts. Arrows and broken spears were inserted in the blood-stained ground, and it did not take long for a layer of white frost to form. When the team was far away, leaving only a vague shadow, the scavengers in the desert came out from all over the place. Birds, beasts, insects and so on all came to enjoy the meal. If another night passed, the broken limbs and wreckage here would be eaten clean. The wind covered the ground with snow, and there was no sign of a battle. Over there, Xiao Xian checked the camel to make sure that the mud was not injured before he turned over and rode on it. Lei and Tuo's situation was also good. Lei's camel was only grazed by an arrow and not shot. However, compared to Tuo and Xiao Xian, he was still a little worse. What happened? With your ability, you shouldn't have missed this arrow. Tuo asked. Lei rode on the camel and drank water from the kettle. His line of sight was taken back from the direction of the Baisher team. He said to Xiao Xian and Tuo, "At that time I felt someone staring at me and felt uncomfortable. Later I saw him smile at me. I really wanted to break his neck." Chapter 313. When they were told by Xiao Xian that the person who had been paying attention to them during the chaos might be the traitor of the Flaming Horns tribe, Lei and Tuo both thought that if at that time they had directly rushed over and killed the traitor, that would have been good. "No wonder I thought that man looked strange," Tuo said. "If I knew, I would have gone over and twisted his head off." Lei felt very regretful. However, they also rationally understood that at that time, the success rate of rushing over was not high, let alone killing Dao Yu on the spot. Moreover, Xiao Xian felt that Dao Yu's strength was not necessarily weaker than theirs. It was even likely that he had the strength to match a senior totem warrior. If they really went over, even if it was a one-on-one, who would lose and who would win was not known, not to mention that Dao Yu was surrounded by Baisher people. After careful analysis, Lei and Tuo's heart was quite complicated. A Yanjiao traitor, whose strength was stronger than them, wanted to clean up the family but could not clean it up. How would they face the shaman and the leader when they went back? Xiao Xian took the time to look for AI sure to confirm that the man who had been standing on the Baisher City King's riding beast was Dao Yu, and then let Lei and Tuo pay more attention. Unlike the native Yanjiao people, Dao Yu, who could mix with the slave owners and reach the present level as a wanderer, was much more complicated than Lei and the others. If they were not careful, it was likely to repeat the tragedy of Yanji and the others. The more they went forward, the more places were covered with ice and snow. Xiao Xian could even feel a sense of oppression. If it was an ordinary person, they might not be able to stand in this place safely. Finally arrived, Sugu said excitedly. In front of them was Luoya City's base in the beast-fighting desert. Nearly 10 meters high stone walls were built in a circle on the periphery. Inside, stone houses were built. There were also some small sand houses around the stone houses, as well as some simple tents. The stone houses were for the slave owners to live in, while the sand houses and simple tents were for the other slaves who guarded here. Xiao Xian and the other two followed Sugu and lived together in a stone house. The 10 slaves that Sugu enslaved were also brought in to serve Sugu. Although this was not Luoya City, it was just a stronghold in the beast-fighting desert. However, in the construction of the stone house, a lot of thought was put into it. Many pieces of monolith with a length of several meters were built into a double-story stone house with a height of more than 10 meters in the center. It was a place for the king to live. Naturally, it could not be shabby. At the same time, it also represented face. If people in other cities saw that the king of Luoya City lived in an ordinary stone house with a height of 3 or 4 meters, he would be laughed at. Sugu originally circled an open space around the stone house to let Cha-Cha rest here. Unfortunately, after entering this cold place, Cha-Cha's spirit was too high. It not only liked the weather but also the atmosphere, tension, blood and various beasts. Every time it disappeared and reappeared, there would always be some injuries on its body, but its spirit was very good. Seeing it play so happily, Xiao Xian also let it be. As the people of the Hui tribe said, the growth of the giant mountain eagle should be accompanied by all kinds of challenges. Xiao Xian was relieved that Cha-Cha had another reason. It had a lot of thoughts and knew how to weigh the pros and cons. If it could not win, it would run away and not die. Xiao Xian and the other two's room was not far from Sugu's. Because of the power of slavery, Sugu trusted Xiao Xian quite a bit. As for how much of this trust was sincere, it was not certain. But at present, the cooperation between the two sides was smooth. "What do you think?" Sugu asked Xiao Xian and the other two. "Not bad," Xiao Xian said. Perhaps some people were not used to such a cold, but that did not include the native Yanjiao people. Sugu looked at Xiao Xian and the other two, and determined that the 3 people really did not care about such a cold. Their condition was also good, so he happily said, "That's just right. Let's go out for a walk. I haven't been here for several years. I almost forgot what the Beast City looks like. I don't know how much has changed inside." For the memory of the Beast City, Sugu's deepest impression was that it was full of primitive, violent and bloody scenes where power determined everything. His heart was hot. When he heard that he could go to the slave owner's beast city, Xiao Xian and the other two were also very excited. Seeing Lei and Tua looking at him expectantly, Xiao Xian nodded. Then thank you, third young master. Xiao Xian knew that with the identity of a tribal person, he could not enter the city. He still had to borrow Su Gu's identity. The Luoya king was not strict about Su Gu's whereabouts. In other words, he was more willing to see Su Gu contact the young masters of other cities, which was also a kind of interpersonal relationship and communication. With a few slaves as well as a few high-level slave guards sent by the Luoya king, Su Gu rode a domesticated beast and went to the beast city. In the world of slave owners, identity was a very important symbol. If they were slaves, they would be regarded as dust. Even some of the lower-status slave owners would not necessarily get much attention. For his partners, Su Gu still took care of them. He gave Xiao Xian and the other two a riding beast to ride. Here, camels were inconvenient, so they could only use fighting beasts. In any case, this also told others that these three people were not slaves. The beast city was not far from the stronghold of Luoya city. After their identity was verified at the city gate, the guards outside the walls of the beast city did not pay much attention. Who are the guards in the city? Xiao Xian asked. Most of them are people from the three cities of Rock Tomb, Fire Hill and Snowfield. These are the three major cities in the desert, and the beast city was also built by them. Su Gu said. Xiao Xian had long learned about the three authoritative cities in this desert from the information provided by Su Gu. The surrounding atmosphere was already a lot more complicated. Xiao Xian did not ask more and paid attention to the surrounding situation. In the middle of the city there was a high field like a giant beast entrenched there. It was also the symbol of the city, the Colosseum. However, that place would only be opened when the kings of each city were involved. The other slave owners would not open it for small fights. There was a bloody smell in the air. Some were fresh blood while some were more old. Perhaps this was the smell of the city. Taking a deep breath, Su Gu sighed. It's really nostalgic. At this moment, several figures rushed past Xiao Xian's group, and the slaves on the edge were almost kicked. Xiao Xian noticed that those people were riding a kind of gerbil that was taller than a person. They moved forward quickly, but he did not know which city they were from. Quick! The people of Rock Tomb and Fire Hill are fighting. Some of those people shouted. Wait, I'll go too. There were people following behind. Su Gu was still angry because of the behavior of those people. When he heard this, he immediately threw away his anger. Go, let's go and see. Su Gu looked forward to it. Chapter 3:14. They followed the people riding the big gerbils to the Colosseum pit over there. In addition to the slave owners at the city king level, the other slave owners usually played in the beast city and were held in the beast pit. In the Colosseum, in addition to the huge Colosseum in the city, there were many sunken pits. Just as those people said, it was in a pit nearby. Because it was the fight between the two cities of Rock Tomb and Fire Hill, whether it was to watch the excitement or to make friends, they all gathered there. When Xiao Xian's group arrived, there were already a lot of people gathered around the huge pit with a diameter of nearly 100 meters and a depth of about 30 meters. Because many of the beasts used for riding were easily manic after being close to the pit, the slave owners would let the slaves look at them while they walked over and stood next to the pit to watch at a close distance. At this time, there was a fierce beast that was nearly 7 meters tall in the pit. Its fur was like yellow sand and the hair all over its body was like steel needles. It looked like a gorilla, but its head was different. It was bigger and looked strange. It had 3 eyes and the blood-red eyeballs were turning, looking at the people around the pit. At this moment, the beast had probably just been brought up. Before, it had been restrained and suppressed by the slaves. After making a ruckus, it was breathing heavily. Listening to the sound, it was like the sound of rolling boulders, which already gave people a kind of oppression. Probably the surrounding spectators made its mood more irritable. The bloodthirsty and violent color in its 3 eyes was even more intense. Roar! The ferocious beast roared. In order to show its strength, it raised its 2 thick arms and hit the ground. For a time, the originally solid ground in the pit had more than one depression. Seeing this scene, the spectators were even more expectant. Under the attack of this level of fighting beast, could the other side win? After showing off its might, the ferocious beast turned its eyes again and scanned the pit. Then it fixed its eyes on a human figure. Su Gu, who was standing on the edge of the pit, rubbed his hands, looking like he couldn't wait to start the fight immediately. Thinking of something, Su Gu said a few words to Wuxia next to him, pointing to a place on the edge of the pit. Wuxia nodded and then left with a cloth bag. Xiao Xian had just noticed where Su Gu pointed. It was a place to bet. The spectators could also place their bets on the battle of the beasts. Who did you bet on? Xiao Xian asked. Su Gu pointed to the pit, the slave that was pressed. The person who was about to engage in a cruel slaughter with the beast in the pit was a slave sent by Rocktoon City. At this moment, the slave stood there very calmly without a good weapon in his hand. Once they entered the pit, there was a 50% chance that only one of them would come out alive, and the other would become the stepping stone for the winner. Of course, it was also possible that neither of them would come out alive. It's starting. Someone shouted. Xiao Xian looked over. The first to make a move was the ferocious beast that was already on the verge of becoming restless. The ferocious beast went straight to the only creature in the pit other than itself. Its two arms full of destructive power mercilessly smashed down. There was no superfluous skill. The attacks of the ferocious beasts were always more direct and fierce. Every blow was the most simple and powerful attack. There was a sudden explosion in the pit, and the splashing dust made people unable to see the situation in the pit. At this time, the people standing outside the pit could clearly feel the tremor of the ground. The slaves standing on the edge of the pit to protect the slave owners saw the attack power of the beast. Their faces did not change much, but their bodies moved closer to the slave owners to protect them, so that they could better and more timely protect people and prevent accidents from happening. Some slave owners also took 2 steps back. There had been an emergency in the pit. The fighting power of the beast was too strong, and those young slave owners who were easily hot-headed, because they were too invested, stood too close to the edge of the pit. So when the pit walls collapsed because they could not withstand the continuous attacks of the fighting beasts, they fell into it together and were trampled to death by the red-eyed fighting beasts. With the lesson of the past, although there were many crazy young slave owners approaching each time, more people still cared about their lives. The attack of the ferocious beast was very fast and destructive, but everyone knew that it was certainly not a simple character to be able to enter the pit. When in a weak position, it was necessary to rely on one's own physical strength, speed, skills, and so on to deal with the opponent and kill the opponent bit by bit. It was impossible to gain the upper hand in a hard fight. In such a place, once he failed, only death would await him. For the first blow, the slave avoided it. In the smoke that had not yet dissipated, there was a continuous roar again. It was the follow-up attack of the ferocious beast after discovering that the first blow was ineffective. The arms of the ferocious beast hit the surrounding stone walls. A piece of stone embedded in the wall was smashed, and some of the protruding corners were flattened. In the face of such a violent and continuous bombardment, the slave in the pit at this time seemed extremely delicate in comparison. After several attacks were avoided, the ferocious beast in the pit became more irritable and eager. Such a puny human had actually managed to avoid its attacks several times. If it could even touch a human, it would be impossible for it to crush a human to death. Boom, there was another explosion. This time, it hit the person, sending him flying and slamming into the wall of the pit. The people around made a hiss sound at the same time, as if the thunder had just hit them. Probably some people were still thinking about how much pain it would be to be hit like this. The slave who suffered a blow quickly entered the battle again, and was not hit again. After a while, the frequency of the ferocious beast's attack began to decline, and the spectators around had begun to become impatient. At this time, the ferocious beast in the pit suddenly made a mournful howl. This made the people who had just complained shocked. In the pit, one of the eyes of the huge ferocious beast was spurting out blood, and its 2 hind legs angrily stomped on the ground. However, such brute force could not be used on the opponent, because the slave's evasion was too fast. Some people who had already bet, their faces began to change. Some looked dignified, while others, such as Su Gu, were surprised and happy. "We're going to win," Su Gu said. In the pit, the ferocious beast's attack had become disorderly because of the pain and impatience. The slave also knew that his chance had come. He took a deep breath and his momentum suddenly soared. The dragon-like meridians on his arms bulged, and some lines appeared on his body. Xiao Xian observed the slave's slave pattern. The slave pattern was similar to the tribe's totem pattern. In the desert cities, different cities and different factions had their own unique slave patterns, which were made by the slave owners themselves. When he saw the slave pattern, Xiao Xian's eyelids jumped. He had seen this slave pattern before, but it was still very early. When he first met Yan Shua, he saw such a pattern. It turned out that those were the people of Rocktoon City. He just didn't know what role Shu played in it. Looking around, Xiao Xian did not find the slave owner. Good. Kill it. Hey. Kill. Kill. The young slave owners around were in high spirits. They liked to find fun in such a bloody situation. The bloodthirsty atmosphere and the sound of fighting made them all burst into excited shouts. Another mournful howl rang out. The ferocious beast was hit hard again. It felt a strong threat, and the remaining two big lantern-like eyeballs turned from violent to frightened. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the bombardment burst out in the pit one after another. Countless sand and soil were shaken, and even the stones on the pit walls were knocked down. The scattered smoke and dust covered the battlefield in the pit for a while, making it difficult to see the situation inside. However, the increasingly strong smell of blood and the constant roar of the ferocious beast stimulated the young slave owners around the pit. Boring, Lei said. Lei's voice was not loud. In the excited cheers and roars around him, it could not even lift a wave. When they hunted, it was always a quick battle. They never dragged it out like this. As a frequent hunter, Lei could naturally see that there was a deliberate delay and a performance attack. The excitement of the slave owners in the pit was not something he could adapt to. He enjoyed the fight with the ferocious beast, but not in such a form. However, this was Beast City. The breath of life in the pit was disappearing. The original strong sense of existence slowly weakened until it came to an end. Win-win. Sugu raised his arms and shouted, his face flushed with excitement. Some of the spectators around the pit were angry, their mouths complaining that they had lost the bet. Some jumped excitedly like Sugu because they had won the bet. Let's go and take our bets. See what we can win by the way. Sugu excitedly took people to the place where the bet was. There, many slave owners who had won the bet had gathered. Their way of betting was relatively special. Even if they won after taking back the bet, what they won may not be a good thing. It depended on luck. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.